Have you ever looked up at the sky and wondered what it might have looked like before birds, before planes, before humans ever dreamed of flight? Imagine a time when the heavens were ruled by creatures with wings so vast they could shadow the sea, their cries echoing across primeval coastlines. Tonight, we drift back to that age. The Mesozoic spanning from 252 to 66 million years ago. A world where the air itself belonged to the pterosaurs. They weren't dinosaurs exactly, but close cousins, masters of lift and glide. Some stretched their wings wider than a small aircraft. Others were no larger than a sparrow. They filled every corner of the ancient skies, hunting fish over warm lagoons, soaring across deserts, nesting on cliffs that have long since crumbled into dust. Picture it. Leathery wings unfurling in the golden light of a Jurassic dawn, the air trembling with motion. How did they do it? What made flight such a powerful evolutionary choice? And who were their ancestors, the first to trade solid ground for open air? Those answers will come later, but for now let the questions linger. Curl up beneath your blanket, close your eyes, and feel the wind of that ancient world brushing past. We'll fly together with these prehistoric pilots, gliding over primeval seas, skimming clouds that no human eye ever saw. If the thought stirs a little wonder in you, share it. Leave a like, a comment, or a quiet smile, because every time someone listens, the pterosaurs take wing again, above the soft murmur of sleep in the timeless sky of imagination. The ancestors of the pterosaurs, the early archosaurs, before wings stretched across the Mesozoic sky, before any creature dared to glide above the forests and rivers of the Triassic world, there were small, determined beings who ran. They darted, leapt, hunted, and hid beneath the early sun of an Earth still, finding its balance after catastrophe. These were the early archosaurs, the ancient rulers of possibility, the lineage from which both dinosaurs and pterosaurs would emerge. Let's travel back about 250 million years, to the very beginning of the Triassic period. The world then was recovering from the worst mass extinction in history, the Great Dying. Over 90% of all marine life and about 70% of land species had vanished, leaving behind a quiet planet and a few survivors. The Earth, as if pressing reset, was once again open for innovation, and in this new dawn of life, the archosaurs appeared. The word archosaur means ruling reptile, though these creatures would hardly have looked regal. Imagine small, agile animals, some no bigger than a house cat, others the size of a large dog. Their bodies were lean and efficient, built for movement. They were not yet the titans that would come later, but they carried the first notes of grandeur, the early hints of power and adaptability that would one day conquer both land and sky. Among these early forms was a remarkable little creature called Euparkeria, whose name means Parker's True One, named after its discoverer in South Africa. Euparkeria lived around 235 million years ago, a modest predator about half a meter long, light on its feet, with a long tail for balance and a set of sharp teeth perfect for catching small prey. If you could have seen it trotting through the ferns, you might have thought it looked almost bird-like. Not quite, but close enough to make you pause. Its legs were tucked partly beneath its body rather than sprawling to the side like a lizard's, a revolutionary posture that made it faster, more stable, and ready to leap. Euparkeria wasn't flying. Not yet, but nature was clearly experimenting. Its bones were already becoming lighter, its limbs more powerful, its joints more flexible. There was something in its design that seemed to whisper of future skies. It's as though evolution, ever the patient sculptor, was beginning to carve the first outline of wings in the air. To understand how Euparkeria and its kin fit into this grand story, we need to see the broader archosaur family. It split early into two main branches, one that would eventually lead to the crocodilians, and another that would lead to dinosaurs and pterosaurs. The crocodile line went low and heavy, favoring armor and ambush. The other line, the ornithodyrans, went high and light, favoring speed, agility, and elevation. Our pterosaur ancestors belonged to that second lineage. They were the restless ones, the runners, the jumpers, the dreamers of movement. The Triassic Earth suited them well. It was a world of strange landscapes, vast deserts and scattered oases, lush river deltas, volcanic plains, still cooling from ancient eruptions. The continents were joined together in a single supercontinent called Pangaea, so animals could wander freely from one end of the planet to the other. But it was a harsh world too, hot, seasonal, and unpredictable. Survival meant being quick, adaptable, and clever. And that's exactly what these proto-pterosaurs were. Some scientists imagine them as small, insect-chasing hunters, sprinting on long hind limbs and snapping at prey with slender jaws. Others see them as lizard-like climbers, darting among rocks and trees, their bodies already showing hints of aerodynamic balance. Whatever their habits, they were not ordinary reptiles. Their skeletons tell us that something was changing, bones becoming hollowed and air-filled, like delicate scaffolding. These lightweight frames would later become perfect for flight, but even on land they were a gift. Light bones meant speed, endurance, agility. They were built, not for brute strength, but for efficiency. If you picture them in your mind, don't think of lumbering reptiles. Think instead of sleek, curious animals with bright, alert eyes and a spring in their step. Their spines were flexible, their limbs long and slender, their tails balanced, like a tightrope walker's pole. They were creatures of movement, built to explore the thin line between running and gliding. The Triassic itself had a restless energy. It was a time of first drafts of nature sketching ideas, revising them, discarding some, and perfecting others. Amphibians gave way to reptiles. Reptiles diversified into countless forms. Insects buzzed in thick swarms. Ferns and conifers spread across the land. And predators evolved sharper teeth, keener senses. The early archosaurs were among the winners of this evolutionary lottery. Their design, upright posture, strong lungs, efficient hearts, gave them an advantage over most competitors. And from this competitive world, the seeds of both dinosaurs and pterosaurs sprouted. Now, Euparkeria itself may not have been the direct ancestor of pterosaurs, but it gives us a vivid model of what that ancestor might have looked like. Its ankle joints were a small revolution, flexible enough for running on land, but strong enough to support brief rearing on hind limbs. This was a new kind of mobility, one that allowed creatures to move with grace and precision. Their bodies were learning balance. Their muscles, especially the ones around the shoulders and hips, were getting stronger, better anchored, more dynamic. You can almost imagine Euparkeria darting across a Triassic floodplain, tail held straight, head low, scanning for a darting insect or a small lizard. Its skin glistened under the sun, scales shifting with motion. Its ribs moved rhythmically as it breathed, perhaps more efficiently than any reptile before it. Every breath was a rehearsal for the oxygen demands of flight that would come millions of years later. As time went on, evolution favored archosaurs that could cover more ground and react faster to threats. Some of them began to develop longer limbs and more rigid backs, traits that would later be crucial for takeoff. Their forelimbs, though still used for walking, were becoming capable of powerful flexion and extension. Nature was tuning its instrument, string by string. One of the most fascinating clues in this story lies in the pneumaticity of their bones, the presence of air spaces within them. These air-filled cavities are a signature trait in pterosaurs and birds, but their roots stretch back to the Triassic archosaurs. Such bones are not only light, but also connected to the animal's respiratory system, allowing for a more efficient flow of oxygen. It's an extraordinary design, one that maximizes strength while minimizing weight. To modern engineers, it would look like something designed with intention, a natural prototype of the airplane's hollow frame. Evolution, though, was not rushing. The Triassic stretched for over 50 million years, long enough for hundreds of experiments to unfold in living form. Some archosaurs became powerful runners, some fierce predators, some small and nimble opportunists, and somewhere among them was the lineage that would in time lift off. We can imagine these early ancestors moving through a shifting landscape of rivers and forests, volcanoes and deserts. The air was likely thick and warm, rich with the scent of resin and dust. Dragonflies the size of your hand zipped past. Amphibians croaked in drying pools. Somewhere among the ferns, a slender archosaur crouched, its eyes fixed on the shimmer of wings above. Perhaps it leapt, not far, not gracefully, but enough for the world to notice. In that instant, whether chasing prey, escaping danger, or simply experimenting, its movement contained the promise of something new, not yet flight, but the rhythm of it. the beginning of a story that would reach the cloud. The shoulder girdle of these early archosaurs is particularly telling. The bones began to rotate into positions that would later support strong wing strokes. The clavicles, those delicate wishbones that brace a flyer's chest, were just beginning to evolve. It's as though nature was laying down a framework, one small adaptation at a time, without yet knowing the masterpiece it was constructing. If you held one of these creatures in your imagination, say, a small Lagosocid or an early pterosauromorph, you might notice how their front limbs could already flex in broad arcs. They were still used for balance or grabbing, but the muscles and tendons hinted at greater possibilities. Their hands were long and grasping, sometimes with an elongated fourth finger, the very same finger that would one day stretch into the framework of a pterosaur wing. The blueprint of the sky was already written into their bone. Even the humor of evolution is visible here. These were not glamorous creatures. Some may have stumbled awkwardly on uneven ground, their long tails whipping behind them. Others may have looked perpetually startled, with big eyes and narrow snout. Yet within their ungainly shapes were the ingredients of wonder. They were evolution's prototypes, the beta versions of a design that would later perfect the art of flight. When you look at modern birds and see their precision, it's easy to forget how long and messy the journey was to get there. The first steps toward flight were taken not in the air, but in the dust by creatures who had no idea that their descendants would one day soar above oceans and cliffs, and yet they were preparing for it. Each step, each breath, each heartbeat, an unconscious rehearsal for a destiny written millions of years ahead. As the Triassic progressed, the world grew more diverse. Forests of cycads and conifers spread. Early mammals scurried in the shadows. The skies for now were still empty, but the stage was being set. Somewhere in those dense, sunlit forests lived the small, sprightly ancestors of the pterosaurs, climbing, running, leaping. Their bones tell of agility, their skeletons tell of potential. They were not yet flyers, but the world was already teaching them the value of lightness, the power of balance, and the promise of motion. If evolution had a voice, perhaps it would have whispered to them, "Get ready," and they did. Slowly, invisibly, over generations and epochs, the traits accumulated. Shoulders broadened, fingers lengthened, bones hollowed, tails stiffened for control. Their brains too began to change, becoming more sensitive to balance and movement. Traits that would serve them well when the first wing beats finally came. But for now they were children of the ground, fast, curious, clever. They hunted insects and small vertebrates. They watched the skies not as pilots, but as predators, eyes following the darting forms of prey. They didn't yet know they were destined to own that sky. Their story is one of quiet transformation, of preparation without intention. It's easy, from our distant vantage point, to see the pattern, how light bones became wings, how powerful legs became launch pads. But in their time, it was just life unfolding. Each adaptation was useful for the present moment. A better run, a quicker escape, a longer leap. Flight would come later, but its roots were already deep in the soil of the Triassic. So, when we look up at the fossilized skeletons of pterosaurs, delicate yet strong, we are also looking at the ghosts of Eupachiria and its kin, the uncelebrated forerunners who never left the ground but carried the dream of the sky in their bones. They are proof that greatness often begins small, with simple acts repeated over ages until they change the world. The pterosaurs did not appear out of nowhere. They rose from a long, unbroken lineage of survivors, tiny, tenacious, and endlessly inventive. Their ancestors did not have wings, but they had something just as important, the courage written into their DNA to keep moving. And move they did, across plains and forests, through droughts and floods, across continents that were still shifting under their feet. They lived fast, died young, and left behind bones that would one day tell their story to creatures who themselves dream of flight. So the next time you see a bird gliding effortlessly through the sky, or an airplane carving contrails through clouds, remember that it all began with a creature the size of your forearm, running through a Triassic forest with eyes bright and curious, a creature that never flew, but carried within it the secret of how to, because sometimes the greatest journeys don't start with wings. They start with the simple, stubborn act of running toward the horizon and not stopping. And in that moment, long before the first pterosaur rose on a thermal wind, Earth itself might have smiled and whispered, "Now, we're ready to fly." The evolutionary reason for flight, survival, pressure, and the demands of the Earth. If evolution had a voice, it would probably sound like the wind, soft, persistent, and impossible to argue with. And during the age when the world was still young and merciless, that wind carried a simple message: fly or die trying. Flight, that breathtaking defiance of gravity, wasn't born from curiosity or adventure. It was carved out of desperation. It was the child of hunger, of danger, of relentless competition. The Earth didn't hand out wings as gifts. It forced them into existence, and nowhere was that pressure greater than in the world that shaped the first pterosaurs. Picture this. The land is hot and restless, stitched with rivers that run low in the dry season and burst into torrents in the rain. Vegetation comes in clumps: ferns, cycads, conifers, each one a tiny oasis surrounded by dust. The air hums with insects, but it also quivers with the heavy steps of predators. The ground is ruled by reptiles, muscular, armored, and merciless. They have teeth like knives and eyes that never blink. This is not a world for the slow or the careless. Here, survival is a performance. Every creature is an actor on a stage of shifting heat and hunger. The early pterosaurs, those slim, lightweight creatures just learning the art of lift, were not born into comfort. They were born into crisis. On the ground, competition was fierce. The early Triassic landscapes teemed with a group of land-dwelling reptiles known as Rauisuchians, powerful, crocodile-like predators with upright stances and jaws, strong enough to crack bone. Imagine a cross between a Komodo dragon and a sports car, fast, sleek, and built to kill. Some grew longer than a bus. They were the apex hunters of their age, and their shadows stretched long over every corner of the ecosystem. For a small, agile creature, life under such tyranny was like living in a world of rolling tanks. One misstep, one moment too slow, and you were gone. Evolution, with its cold arithmetic, began to favor those who could escape the jaws of the ground. And so, inch by inch, generation by generation, bodies began to change. It started with leaping. A jump buys you a second. A leap from a rock buys you two. A glide from a height buys you a chance at tomorrow. Over time, muscles grew stronger. Membranes stretched wider. Bones grew lighter. And one day, no one knows exactly when, one of those leaps didn't end with a fall. It turned into a glide. That glide was not just motion, it was freedom. From the air, the world looked different. The ground, with all its snarling jaws and snapping teeth, was suddenly below, distant, harmless. The sky was open, the air was abundant, and the possibilities, food, safety, migration, were endless. Flight was the perfect evolutionary rebellion against gravity's tyranny. But make no mistake, it was a hard bargain. The first flyers didn't have engines, feathers, or flight manuals. They had thin membranes stretched between bone and skin, fragile as parchment, but strong enough to catch the wind. Those wings were miracles of compromise, light but tough, delicate yet deadly. A bad gust, a wrong landing, and you were a broken heap. Evolution doesn't hand out refunds. Still, the rewards outweighed the risks. The ability to take to the air was the ultimate survival strategy in a dangerous world. Predators that once ruled the land could only look up in frustration as their prey disappeared into the blue. The sky, which had been empty since time began, suddenly filled with movement. But escaping danger wasn't the only reason flight evolved. It was also about opportunity. From above, the world opened up. Food sources that were once out of reach became accessible. Insects that drifted through the warm Triassic air became the perfect aerial buffet. Some early pterosaurs became insectivores, snapping up clouds of prey with precise snapping jaws. Others learned to skim the surface of water, catching small fish or crustaceans. Flying wasn't just about staying alive, it was about thriving in ways the earthbound could never imagine. Those who could move between ecosystems quickly, gliding from one river valley to another, or from one patch of forest to the next, had an enormous advantage. They could find food when droughts came. They could migrate when seasons shifted. They could escape floods, fires, and predators simply by rising above them. The sky, once empty, became a new ecosystem, an untouched frontier of evolution. Now, if you could somehow watch this unfold in real time, say with a cosmic time-lapse camera, you'd see millions of years of chaos condense into a single, astonishing trend. The slow blooming of the air, from gliders to flyers, from cautious jumps to confident arc, a dance of adaptation written in bone and muscle and membrane. And the earth, patient as ever, watched its children learn. The pressures of the environment continued to push, refine, and demand more. Air currents were unpredictable. Thermals were patchy. Flying wasn't just about strength, it required control. So evolution gave these early aviators better balance, sharper vision, and brains tuned to motion. The inner ear, which helps sense equilibrium, became more sophisticated. Their eyes grew large, adapted to judge distances from above. Even their metabolisms changed, growing faster, more efficient, better able to power the high-energy demands of flight. Flight, as it turns out, is hungry work. Every wing beat costs energy, but it also opens up new kinds of energy, new foods, new opportunities. Aerial hunters could track prey over long distances. Scavengers could spot carcasses from the air long before others arrived. And when resources ran low, flight offered the ultimate escape hatch: migration. When the local ecosystem faltered, the sky remained open. This ability to move between worlds, the land, the air, the water's edge, was revolutionary. It wasn't just survival, it was expansion. A creature that could fly could go anywhere, and in a world of sudden droughts, rising seas, and fierce predators, anywhere was the most valuable resource of all. But flight came with trade-offs. Lightness meant fragility. A pterosaur couldn't afford heavy armor or thick bones. Its survival depended on agility, not brute strength. Its bones were hollow, filled with air sacs that made it buoyant, but vulnerable. Its skin stretched thin over its wings, requiring constant care. A tear could mean death. These were creatures that lived on the edge of possibility, elegant, efficient, but always at risk of collapse. And yet, they flourished. For over 150 million years, pterosaurs owned the air. They grew into a dazzling variety of forms, from tiny insect catchers to giants with wingspans rivaling small planes. Their success was not just a matter of anatomy, but of attitude. Evolution had taught them something simple. In a dangerous world, movement is survival. Even their behavior evolved alongside their wings. Some pterosaurs may have hunted cooperatively, circling like hawks. Others may have nested in colonies on high cliffs, safe from ground predators. Their young were likely precocious, able to fly soon after hatching, a necessity in a world where staying grounded meant getting eaten. Everything about them screamed adaptation. Every bone, every featherless wing, every aerodynamic curve was a response to pressure. Flight also offered a new dimension to predator-prey dynamics. The first flyers didn't just flee, they became hunters themselves. Insects that once had free reign of the air suddenly faced new aerial predators. The arms race extended upward. Better flyers evolved to catch better flyers. The air became alive with pursuit. Evolution had invented the world's first dogfights, millions of years before the word dog even existed. If you were to stand in a Triassic valley at dusk, hypothetically, with a time machine and very good bug repellent, you might see them silhouetted against the crimson sky, leathery wings sweeping in slow, confident arcs, gliding over still water, then vanishing into the gathering dark. Below them, Rowo-Sochians prowled, teeth glinting, frustrated at their untouchable prey. Above, the air shimmered with the quiet rustle of wings. The balance of power had shifted. The ground was no longer the only stage of life's drama. Evolution had opened a new act, the aerial age, and in this age, the rules changed. To be fast was not enough. You had to be precise. To be clever was not enough. You had to adapt in 3 dimensions. The sky demanded mastery of physics, of physiology, of instinct. Those who learned its rhythms survived. Those who didn't became part of the fossil record, anonymous footnotes in the grand experiment of life. Humor lingers even in this brutal story. Imagine one of those early pterosaurs wobbling through its first flight, flapping too hard, spinning midair, landing face first in a patch of ferns. Somewhere, evolution chuckled softly and took notes. "Good try," it said. "Let's make the next one a little more aerodynamic." Over time, those mistakes became miracles. The shoulder joints refined, the chest muscles enlarged, the wings strengthened. By the Jurassic, flight was no longer an accident. It was art, and all of it traced back to the relentless pressures of survival. The irony is that the same world that made flight necessary also made it possible. The Triassic atmosphere was dense enough to provide lift, but turbulent enough to demand precision. The planet's geography, with its cliffs, trees, and changing sea levels, offered both hazards and training grounds. The predators below kept evolution motivated. The winds above offered rewards. It was a perfect storm for innovation. Flight didn't emerge because life wanted to explore. It emerged because life had no choice. Every advantage, however small, meant another generation could try again. Every slight improvement in wing shape, every subtle refinement in balance, was the difference between extinction and evolution. And through that long, invisible process, a new kind of creature appeared, one that could move through the air as easily as others walked on land. It wasn't divine intervention or luck. It was persistence. The oldest kind of magic, the one that turns struggle into beauty. When you think of flight today, birds wheeling through the sky, bats darting at dusk, planes streaking across the stratosphere, it's easy to forget how much it cost to earn those wings. The first aviators weren't graceful angels. They were survivors, pushed by hunger, fear, and the grinding pressure of life itself. But that's what makes them extraordinary. They didn't just escape their world, they redefined it. The air, once an empty void, became a living space, a hunting ground, a highway. The Rausochians that once terrorized the ground eventually vanished, victims of extinction and change. But their prey, the small, quick creatures who learned to fly, endured. They turned survival into art and necessity into freedom. Evolution doesn't write poetry, but sometimes its results read like it. The sky once silent, filled with motion. Wings sliced through sunlight. Shadows rippled over the ground. And the earth, as if amused by its own creativity, might have whispered to its new children, "There, you've learnt to fly. Let's see what you can do with it." The Triassic dawn, the first flight of the pterosaurs. The story of flight begins not with thunder or glory, but with something small, fragile, light, and brave. The first pterosaurs were not giants. They were tiny ambassadors of a new frontier. The Triassic world, hot, restless, and unpredictable, had given birth to the planet's first vertebrate flyers. And somewhere in that ancient sky, a creature the size of your hand caught the wind for the very first time. Imagine it. The year is something like 220 million BC. The continents are still welded together into the vast expanse of Pangaea, a single sun-baked supercontinent surrounded by wide, warm seas. The air is thick with the scent of resin and salt. Volcanoes simmer along the horizon. Giant conifers rise like green towers from the coastlines, their roots gripping dry red soil. The days are long, the rain is scarce, and the sky blazes bronze in the afternoon heat. And there, just above the shoreline, above the whisper of waves, something moves. Not a leaf, not an insect, but something entirely new. It glides. The first pterosaurs have arrived. They are small, astonishingly small, some barely 20 to 50 centimeters from wingtip to wingtip. To a human eye, they would look almost delicate, like living kites made of bone and leather. But make no mistake, they are perfect for their time. Their wings are not feathered like a bird's or mechanical like a plane's. They are thin membranes of skin, stretched taut over an elongated fourth finger that reaches out like a living mast. Between that finger, the body, and the hind limbs, the skin forms a sail, a living airfoil. Take Preandactylus, for instance, a small early pterosaur whose fossils were discovered in what is now northern Italy. Its wingspan was less than half a meter. It probably weighed about as much as a bar of soap. Its body was light and wiry, built for agility rather than strength. It had long jaws lined with fine teeth, perfect for snatching insects mid-air or plucking them from the surface of water. To modern eyes, it might have looked like a strange cross between a bat, a lizard, and an origami experiment gone right. Preondactylus and its kin lived along coastlines, lagoons, and river mouths, the meeting places of land and sea. These were ecosystems rich in insects and small fish, but also treacherous with predators. The earliest pterosaurs took advantage of these environments by doing something no other creature had done before. They mastered the third dimension. They took to the air, not as passengers of the wind, but as pilots. At first, their flight may not have been elegant. Perhaps it began as a series of short glides, launching from cliffs, rocks, or tree trunks, catching a warm updraft, and coasting. But even that brief taste of air changed everything. For the first time in Earth's history, the skies were alive. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the courage of that first takeoff. Every instinct in a land-dwelling animal screams against it. The ground is safety, the air is nothingness. Yet against all odds, these tiny pioneers flung themselves into the void, and it worked. They didn't fall, they glided. They turned the empty space between the earth and the clouds into a new home. Their bodies were engineering marvels. Each bone was shaped by millions of years of trial and error. The humerus, the upper arm bone, was thick and strong, anchoring the muscles that powered the downstroke. The elongated fourth finger formed the main support of the wing membrane, while the remaining fingers stayed short, useful for climbing and grasping. The chest bones grew keels for muscle attachment, hinting at powerful shoulders and forelimbs. Even their spines and hips were adjusted for balance, keeping them stable in midair. And their wings. Oh, their wings were not just skin stretched over bone. They were sophisticated structures, reinforced with fibers called actinofibrils, which stiffened and controlled the surface. This allowed pterosaurs to fine-tune their flight, rolling, pitching, banking, and braking with precision. The membrane itself was alive, fed by blood vessels and nerves, capable of healing and flexing. It was not just a tool, it was part of them, as responsive as your own hand. Flying in the Triassic air was not easy. The world was hotter and drier than today, and the atmosphere was thinner. Thermals, columns of rising warm air, were unpredictable, but those conditions favored the small and the daring. Early pterosaurs like Preondactylus thrived on light winds and open skies. They probably hunted during the cooler hours of morning and evening, when insects were most active and the heat less oppressive. It's tempting to imagine one perched on a rocky ledge, its wings folded neatly against its body, eyes glinting with anticipation. A gust sweeps up from the sea. The creature crouches, tenses, and leaps. For a heartbeat, gravity wins. Then the wings catch the air, flex, and suddenly it's free. The Triassic coastlines must have been full of such moments. Fleets of small pterosaurs darting over shallow water, wings flashing in the sun, snapping up insects in mid-flight. Their cries echoing over the surf, a chorus of sharp clicking calls. Below them, fish scatter. Above them, the first aerial hunters learn to turn. These were not timid animals. Their world was fierce, their bodies fragile, and yet they thrived. Fossil evidence suggests that early pterosaurs were widespread by the end of the Triassic, from Europe to Greenland to Madagascar. They had found a formula that worked: light bones, fast metabolism, sharp senses, and unmatched mobility. They were also clever. Their large eye sockets and brain cavities hinted advanced vision and coordination. They could likely track fast-moving prey, adjust their flight paths in mid-air, and land with surprising precision. Their brains were proportionally large for reptiles of their size, another quiet innovation that would serve all flyers well in the future. But perhaps the most beautiful thing about these first pterosaurs was their audacity. They were fragile in every physical sense, thin-boned, light-framed, easily crushed. And yet, they became the first vertebrates to conquer the air. They did it without feathers, without jet engines, without any of the things that later flyers would rely on. Just instinct, anatomy, and the relentless whisper of evolution. Try again, try again, try again. Their habitats were places of contrast. Parched deserts beside shallow lagoons, forests of conifers, giving way to stony coasts. The seas of the Triassic were alive with ammonites, early fish and marine reptiles, while the land teemed with crocodile-like predators. It was a dangerous neighborhood. The air, by comparison, was empty and waiting. Some early pterosaurs likely roosted on cliffs or tree trunks, using their clawed feet to cling to bark or rock. Their wings folded neatly against their sides, letting them move awkwardly but efficiently on land. They could launch quickly when threatened, sometimes from all fours, sometimes from a crouched leap. This ability to take off under pressure was crucial. A hesitation could mean becoming lunch for something larger and toothier. And yet, even as they faced constant risk, they were reshaping the ecosystem around them. By hunting insects, they helped control populations that might otherwise have overwhelmed the fragile Triassic food webs. By becoming prey themselves for larger animals, they linked the air to the ground. For the first time, the planet had a complete vertical ecosystem. Life below, life above, and life moving between. The Triassic skies were a theatre of firsts. For the first time, a shadow passed overhead that was not cast by clouds or mountains. For the first time, a creature could chase the sunrise, not by walking, but by gliding. For the first time, the air became a living domain. And yet, for all their success, the early pterosaurs were not invincible. Their small size made them vulnerable to storms and predators. Their wings, though strong, required careful maintenance. A tear could ground them, and a grounded pterosaur was an easy meal. They must have lived fast, growing quickly, reproducing often, always one step or one flap ahead of disaster. But what a life it must have been. Imagine being the first creature to see the world from above, to look down on rivers winding like silver threads, forests glowing in the late sun, distant volcanoes painting the sky red, to feel the rush of air under your skin, the lift of a thermal carrying you higher than any predator could reach. You wouldn't have words for it, but you'd know it was good. You'd know you were meant for it. Flight wasn't just survival, it was transformation. The earliest pterosaurs didn't just escape the ground. They changed the rules of life itself. For the first time, mobility was no longer bound by terrain. The planet had 3 dimensions of possibility, and the first pterosaurs explored them all. Insects, unaware of their place in history, buzzed lazily through the air and vanished in the jaws of history's first aerial hunter. Somewhere, a Preondactylus banked sharply, its membrane catching the late afternoon light. Below, a Rauasochian prowled the beach, its massive head turning skyward as the tiny flyer vanished into the wind. The Triassic sun sank low. The air shimmered with heat, and across the endless coastlines of Pangaea, wings beat for the first time in the long history of life. It must have been a sight. Small silhouettes darting across the molten sky, their shadows fleeting, their future limitless. They didn't know it, but they were the beginning of something extraordinary, the age of flight, the aerial empire of the pterosaurs. Earth, ever the patient artist, might have smiled in that golden light and whispered once more, half to itself, half to its daring new creation. There you go. The sky suits you. And with that, the Triassic world watched as its fragile, fearless children claimed the heavens for the very first time. The Jurassic sky, the great diversification of the pterosaurs. By the time the calendar of deep time turned to the Jurassic period, roughly 2,000 million years ago, the Earth had settled into a new rhythm. The supercontinent Pangaea was beginning to break apart. The seas were rising, and the sky was no longer empty. It hummed, shimmered, and glittered with wings. The pterosaurs, those once timid pioneers of the air, had grown bold. They had learned to master the wind, to skim the waves, to hunt, to soar, and most of all to diversify. If the Triassic was the age of fragile first flight, then the Jurassic was the age of refinement. This was when flight truly came into its own, when wings met wind with confidence, and evolution finally began to show off. The world had grown lush and wild, dense with forests, steaming with ferns, glittering with oceans that stretched across the equator. The mighty Tethys Sea, warm and full of life, rolled between the breaking continents. Its coastlines were alive with conifers, cycads, and palm-like trees. while shoals of silver fish flickered beneath the surface like liquid mirrors. Above them, the pterosaurs ruled. They were larger now, averaging 1 to 2 meters in wingspan, no longer the dainty gliders of old, but true aerial hunters and fishers. Names like Pterodactylus and Dimorphodon have become legends of the Jurassic sky, and for good reason. These were creatures of precision and power, built for life between sea and sky. Let's start with Pterodactylus, the namesake of the entire group. If you were to visit the tropical shores of what is now southern Germany during the late Jurassic, you might find one perched on a rock at the edge of the ancient lagoon that once formed the Solnhofen limestone. The air would be heavy with salt and insects, the water glassy and rich with fish. There, waiting for the perfect moment, stands a pterosaur about as tall as your knee, with a wingspan of just over a meter. Its long, narrow beak glints in the sunlight, lined with needle-like teeth, nature's version of a fine-toothed comb. A flash of silver breaks the surface. In a blur, the pterosaur dives, not into the water but down upon it, snatching the fish with a quick snap before it can retreat. A few flaps, a twist of the tail, and it's airborne again, droplets trailing like jewels behind it. It's a small scene, but one that played out countless times along the coasts of the Tethys. Pterodactylus was perfectly adapted to this life. Its long, tapered wings were made for efficient gliding, allowing it to patrol vast stretches of coastline with minimal effort. Its bones were air-filled yet strong, its metabolism quick, its senses sharp. It was an aerial fisherman, patient but precise, and one of the first vertebrates to truly live between the elements, part of the sea, part of the sky. A little farther inland, among the coastal cliffs and thick Jurassic forests, another flyer hunted in its own peculiar style. Dimorphodon. If Pterodactylus was sleek and graceful, Dimorphodon was, well, let's say it had personality. About 1.5 meters across, with a large head, a short neck and a tail that might have doubled as a stabilizer, Dimorphodon looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. Its skull was massive compared to its body, its teeth arranged in 2 distinct shapes, hence the name, which literally means two-formed tooth. This dental diversity made it a versatile feeder. It could catch fish, crunch insects, or even grab small land animals. Its large eyes suggest excellent vision, perhaps for spotting prey through the dappled light of the forest canopy. Fossil evidence suggests it may have roosted in trees or cliffs, clambering about on all fours when not in the air. Picture it for a moment. A forest on a humid Jurassic afternoon, ferns thick as walls, insects buzzing in the heat. A sudden flutter, a leathery wing stretches out from a branch, catching the light. Then another. With an awkward hop, the Dimorphodon launches, its wings beating hard, until it clears the canopy. It glides briefly, scanning the ground below. A small lizard scurries through the undergrowth. The pterosaur folds its wings, drops like a stone, and vanishes into the green, with a snap and a rustle. Seconds later, it's airborne again, a morsel dangling from its jaws. These were not clumsy creatures. They were specialists, each adapted to its own niche, in a world that was growing increasingly complex. Some preferred the coasts, others the forests, and some even ventured far out over the open sea. Their wingspans, diets, and habits varied wildly, but all shared the same fundamental mastery. They had turned air into territory. The Tethys Sea was their grand stage. It was a vast tropical expanse, teeming with ammonites, small fish, and marine reptiles. Its shores were studded with lagoons, cliffs, and coral reefs. The air above it was alive with wings, pterosaurs soaring in lazy circles, scanning the glittering surface below for the flick of prey. In the evenings, as the sun bled into the water, flocks may have glided together toward roosting cliffs, their silhouettes tracing long shadows across the surf. Some scientists believe that these early Jurassic pterosaurs may have hunted in groups, following schools of fish much as modern seabirds do. The sight must have been extraordinary. Dozens of leathery-winged creatures wheeling together, diving and swooping, their calls echoing over the waves. They weren't just flying, they were flying with purpose, and the earth seemed to cheer them on. During the Jurassic, the climate was warm, humid, and stable. Carbon dioxide levels were high, and lush vegetation flourished in the lowlands. This created a thriving web of life. from towering sauropods to darting insects, and in that web the pterosaurs found endless opportunity. The coasts in particular were havens for them. The combination of cliffs for nesting, seas for feeding, and steady air currents for lift made the shorelines of the Tethys ideal homes. Their anatomy reflected their success. Pterosaurs developed stronger chests and shoulders to power longer flights. Their wing membranes evolved to include multiple muscle-controlled regions, giving them precise control over their aerodynamics. Even their skin changed, becoming tougher and covered with tiny hair-like filaments called pycnofibers, a sort of prehistoric fuzz that helped regulate body temperature and reduce drag. If you've ever pictured a pterosaur as a smooth, scaly lizard with wings, think again. These creatures were warm-blooded, active, and surprisingly fluffy, and they were efficient. A modern engineer might admire the way a pterosaur's skeleton balances strength and lightness. The bones were hollow but internally reinforced with struts, like the framework of an aircraft wing. Their skulls, though large, were built like trusses, strong enough to handle the stress of snapping at prey while remaining light enough for flight. Their joints were fine-tuned, allowing for subtle shifts in wing shape mid-air. Evolution had turned them into biological gliders, soaring machines built not of metal and rivets, but of bone and sinew. Of course, life in the Jurassic wasn't all graceful gliding and seaside sunsets. It was a time of immense competition. The seas were full of predators, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, that could easily snatch a careless pterosaur from above. On land, early mammals and dinosaurs were beginning to diversify, competing for space and food. Insects were abundant, but so were other insect eaters. To survive, the pterosaurs had to stay fast, alert, and adaptable. Their flight patterns reflected this. Some species were masters of hovering flight over the water, using thermal updrafts and sea breezes to stay aloft with minimal effort. Others were more acrobatic, darting through the coastal trees to snatch prey in mid-air. Their mobility gave them the edge. While the world below was divided by terrain and predators, the sky remained open. The diversity of Jurassic pterosaurs was not just physical, it was behavioral. Fossil evidence hints at complex nesting sites, perhaps even colonies. Some species may have laid eggs in sandy beaches or soft soil, covering them with vegetation for warmth. Hatchlings, equipped with proportionally large wings, were likely able to fly soon after birth. No childhood for a pterosaur, just a quick stretch of the wings, and off you go into the nearest thermal. Humorously enough, this means the world's first family vacations may have been airborne. Picture a coastal cliff at dawn, dozens of tiny pterosaurs testing their wings while the adults circle nearby, squawking instructions that sound suspiciously like parental anxiety. Some might have overshot their landings, tumbling into the surf, flapping furiously back to shore. Evolution, as always, was patient but unsparing. Those who mastered flight survived to pass on their genes. Those who didn't became dinner. And yet, for millions of years, they dominated. Their mastery of the sky was absolute. The Jurassic atmosphere belonged to them, the same way the seas belonged to the plesiosaurs and the land to the dinosaurs. If you could stand on a cliff overlooking the Tethys Sea, the scene would be mesmerizing. Glittering water, the rhythmic crash of waves, and above it all, a living tapestry of wings. Pterodactylus skimming the waves, Dimorphodon flapping between trees, smaller species darting through clouds of insects, while others glided in lazy spirals, hundreds of meters overhead. Even their colors, though we can only guess, were probably vivid. Some may have had patterned wings for camouflage or display. Perhaps males showed off bright crests during mating season, flashing their colors against the sunlight. The Jurassic was not a dull world. It was vibrant, noisy, and alive with motion. And Earth seemed pleased. The planet had found its equilibrium again. The atmosphere, the oceans, the forests, all pulsed with life, and in the skies above, the pterosaurs reigned as symbols of what adaptation could achieve. The land-bound reptiles below might glare upward, but they could never follow. The air was no longer just an element, it was an empire. Still, it's worth remembering that this empire was ruled not by giants or monsters, but by creatures rarely larger than a seagull. Their power wasn't in size, it was in grace. They were the quiet architects of a new world order, turning the impossible into the everyday. As the Jurassic Age rolled on, their forms multiplied. Some developed shorter tails and more compact bodies, improving their maneuverability. Others elongated their skulls, refining their fishing strategies. A few experimented with crests, those elegant aerodynamic ornaments whose purpose we still debate. Were they for display, for balance, or just nature's way of saying why not? Whatever the reason, the result was spectacular. The sky above the Tethys was never the same again. When the sun set over those ancient seas and the wind shifted from warm to cool, the silhouettes of the pterosaurs would cross the golden horizon in slow, easy arcs. Below, the water glowed with reflected fire. Above, the stars began to pierce the twilight. And somewhere in that fading light, one might imagine the planet whispering, amused and proud, "Go on then, little flyers. The world is wide, the wind is yours." And they did. For 50 million years, the pterosaurs of the Jurassic soared, hunted, nested, and evolved, each generation a little more refined, a little more daring. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. They were artists of the air. And the Earth, watching them trace graceful loops across the sky, could only smile in quiet satisfaction. The Cretaceous sky, the pinnacle of the pterosaurs. By the dawn of the Cretaceous period, around 14.5 million years ago, the world had become a stage vast enough for giants. The continents were drifting apart, the oceans widening into sprawling blue worlds, and the air, warm, heavy, and full of life, belonged utterly to the pterosaurs. The pioneers of the Triassic and the craftsmen of the Jurassic had given way to the rulers of the Cretaceous. They were no longer the fragile, tentative gliders of early ages. They were sky kings, architects of the air, stretching their wings across horizons wider than any the Earth had ever seen. This was their golden age, their high summer, their magnificent finale. The Cretaceous sky was alive with scale and spectacle. The seas were teeming, the coasts lush, the winds strong, and soaring above it all came the pterosaurs, larger and more diverse than ever, creatures that seemed to defy gravity and reason alike. Imagine standing on a cliff somewhere above the great Western Interior Seaway, that vast, shallow ocean that once split North America in two. The air is thick with heat and salt. The waves roll far below, dotted with the backs of ancient fish and the occasional ripple of a marine reptile surfacing for air. Suddenly, a shadow passes overhead. Vast, deliberate, silent. You look up and there it is, a pteranodon. Wings stretched nearly 6 meters from tip to tip, gliding effortlessly through the sunlit air. Its body is sleek, its skull elongated into a graceful beak that ends in a backward sweeping crest, like a pennant streaming in the wind. It makes no sound but the faint rush of air. With a tilt of its wings, it banks over the sea, scanning for prey. Then, in one smooth motion, it dives, folding its wings, slicing through the air like a blade. A flash of spray, a shimmer of fish, and then it's climbing again, beating its enormous wings just enough to regain altitude. A few powerful strokes, and it's back in the current, letting the warm thermals lift it skyward. The pteranodon was the undisputed emblem of the Cretaceous sky. Elegant, efficient, and utterly at home in the air, it was a creature designed for open horizons. Its wings, shaped for soaring, could keep it aloft for hours with minimal effort. The air currents above the Cretaceous oceans became its highways, the winds its allies. It fed mostly on fish, its long, toothless beak perfect for grasping slippery prey. To the sea creatures below, its shadow was a fleeting omen of danger. To us millions of years later, it is the very image of prehistoric grace. But Pteranodon was far from alone. The Cretaceous was the age of pterosaur variety, of all shapes, sizes, and lifestyles. Some were giants that dwarfed eagles and albatrosses. Others were small, nimble insect hunters that darted between trees and cliffs. They had conquered every sky, coastal, inland, and open ocean. Evolution had given them the full palette of possibility, and they painted the air with it. Consider Nyctosaurus, another Cretaceous marvel. Its name means night lizard, though it was anything but nocturnal. With a wingspan of about 3 meters, it was a medium-sized cousin of Pteranodon. But it came with a twist, a ridiculous, glorious twist. Rising from the back of its head was a crest shaped like a tuning fork. taller than its entire body. What it was for, no one can say. Was it a display ornament, a counterbalance in flight, or simply evolution having a little fun? Whatever the reason, it made Nyctosaurus one of the most flamboyant creatures ever to ride the wind. Picture it gliding over the waves, that double-pronged crest slicing the air like the mast of a sailing ship. If you saw it today, you might laugh, right before realizing you were watching the finest flyer the world had ever known. These pterosaurs were masters of aerodynamics. Their hollow bones, reinforced by internal struts, made them light but strong, their wing membranes stretching from elongated fingers to their sides, and even to their hind limbs, were flexible and finely controlled, allowing subtle adjustments mid-flight. Beneath those membranes ran a network of muscle fibers and blood vessels, a living system of hydraulics and sensors. The wings weren't just surfaces, they were instruments. They could flex, twist, and change shape on command, allowing these creatures to surf the invisible rivers of air that flowed across the planet, and the Earth in turn seemed designed for them. The Cretaceous climate was warm and forgiving, with high oxygen levels and vast thermal currents rising from the open seas, the perfect conditions for flight. The oceans were rich with prey, schools of fish, squid-like cephalopods, and surface dwellers that glittered in the sunlight. Above this abundance, pterosaurs found endless hunting grounds. Some were specialists of the shore, others, like Pteranodon, became creatures of the open ocean, spending most of their lives above the waves. Their wings were long and narrow, ideal for soaring in steady winds. Their legs were tucked close, their bodies streamlined, every motion shaped by efficiency. When they landed, it was often awkward, a brief, clumsy affair of folded wings and ungainly hops. But in the air they were poetry. Picture a pteranodon colony on a Cretaceous cliff. The air is alive with motion. Adults circle in lazy spirals overhead, while younger ones, awkward and enthusiastic, practice short flights from the ledges, sometimes overshooting and landing in the surf with undignified splashes. The calls echo up and down the coastline, harsh, trumpet-like cries that mix with the roar of the sea. Below, the waves flash silver with the bodies of fish fleeing the shadows above. The sky is never still, and in those skies, evolution continued to experiment. Some species developed elaborate head crests, some small, some towering, some shaped like sails or fans. The purpose of these crests remains one of paleontology's enduring debates. Were they for display, to impress mates, or intimidate rivals? Were they aerodynamic rudders, stabilizing the animal in flight, or were they simply the prehistoric equivalent of fashion statements, a declaration of individuality written in bone? Whatever their role, the variety was staggering. The Cretaceous sky was a festival of shapes and silhouettes. The diversity of size was just as dramatic. While many Cretaceous pterosaurs like Pteranodon and Nyctosaurus were moderate in scale, others grew to dimensions so astonishing they almost sound fictional. The later parts of this era would see species like Quetzalcoatlus, a name we'll meet again in its own right, whose wings could stretch over 10 meters. But even before those giants appeared, the groundwork was being laid. Every refinement of wing structure, every adjustment of muscle and bone, every nuance of air and lift was being tested, perfected, and passed along. Their diets expanded with their reach. Some Cretaceous pterosaurs skimmed the surface of the water, dipping their long jaws to snatch fish in motion. Others dived more deeply, using momentum to pierce the sea's surface before pulling up with a struggling meal. Some hunted crustaceans and small vertebrates in coastal shallows. Others were insectivores or scavengers. Each species had carved out a role, an aerial occupation that kept the ecosystem in balance. The oceans of the Cretaceous were dangerous places. Giant marine reptiles, mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, patrolled the waters below. Sharks with teeth like knives prowled the depths, but the pterosaurs had what none of those predators did: the sky. With a single sweep of their wings, they could vanish into the air, safe above the turmoil. The sea belonged to monsters, the heavens belonged to them. And yet, for all their dominance, they were not complacent. Evolution continued to sculpt them, adding refinements and subtleties, their senses sharpened, their eyes large and forward-facing, capable of spotting movement across vast distances. Their brains grew more complex, their cerebellums expanding to control flight with pinpoint accuracy. The Cretaceous sky demanded mastery, and the pterosaurs delivered. Imagine them riding the thermals high above the ancient oceans, tracing invisible highways of rising air. At those altitudes, the world below would blur into shifting shades of blue and green. They could travel for miles without a single wing beat, gliding effortlessly on air currents. When storms rolled in, they could sense them long before the first clouds appeared, banking away toward calmer skies. They were not only creatures of instinct, they were creatures of strategy, and for all their grandeur, they were not humorless. Nature, after all, has a sense of irony. For every majestic pteranodon, gliding like a monarch, there were likely a few clumsy youngsters crash-landing into the surf, flapping indignantly as they tried to take off again. Even in the golden age of flight, evolution had room for bloopers. One can imagine a Cretaceous beach filled with half-grown pterosaurs learning to fish, their squawks of frustration mingling with the cries of gull-like adults above. Life for a pterosaur was not without challenges. The open ocean could be perilous. Storms could ground them for days. Large predators sometimes leapt from the water to snatch them mid-flight. Eggs and young were vulnerable to scavengers, and though their wings were marvels of design, they required constant care. Tears had to heal quickly, or the cost was fatal. But despite it all, the pterosaurs endured. They thrived. The Cretaceous world seemed built for them. Its warmth, its winds, its wide blue skies. This was the height of their reign, the perfection of their kind. They were the first vertebrates to conquer true long-distance flight, capable of traveling hundreds of kilometers across open ocean. They were explorers, migrants, and masters of the horizon. At sunset, the Cretaceous skies must have been a breathtaking sight. Picture a vast orange glow spreading across the sea, the air alive with silhouettes, dozens, maybe hundreds, of pterosaurs soaring homeward, their wings catching the last light. Some glide in perfect V-shaped formations, others drift alone, carried by the dying thermals. Beneath them, the waves shimmer gold. The smell of salt and resin fills the air. The world hums with life, and perhaps, if the earth itself could speak in that moment, it would murmur softly to its winged children, "Fly higher. You've earned it." For tens of millions of years, they did just that. The Cretaceous sky was theirs, a vast cathedral of light and wind and motion. The oceans glittered beneath them. The continents shifted slowly below. But the air belonged to the pterosaurs. They were the living expression of freedom. The Earth's own dream of flight made flesh. Even now, when we find their fossils, those delicate bones turned to stone, we can still see it. The sweep of the wing, the curve of the beak, the faint outline of the membrane. They seem ready to lift off again, to rise from the rock and rejoin the wind. The Cretaceous was their masterpiece. Evolution, having spent millions of years experimenting, refining and perfecting, had reached its crescendo. The pterosaurs had become everything flight could be: elegant, efficient, and utterly awe-inspiring. They ruled not through brute force but through grace. The sky was theirs, and through them the earth itself had learned to breathe in 3 dimensions. And so they flew over endless seas, beneath blazing suns across a world still in motion. Their shadows stretched over waves, their cries echoed in the wind. They were the high note in the great song of life, the perfect balance of strength and fragility, daring and design. If you close your eyes, you might almost hear them: the rush of wings, the call of hunters over the ocean, the whisper of the warm Cretaceous breeze, and somewhere far above, a pteranodon glides effortlessly through the fading light, as the earth, proud and wistful, whispers its final encouragement. Fly while you can, my children. The world is changing, but for now, the sky is yours. The many wings of the sky, counting the pterosaurs. If you ever find yourself staring up at a quiet sky, it might be comforting or mildly alarming to know that there was once a time when it was full of wings. Not just a few, not a flock or two, but an entire world's worth of them. For over 160 million years, the pterosaurs ruled the air, and they didn't just come in one shape or size, they came in hundreds. Big, small, sleek, stubby, long-beaked, crest-headed, and everything in between. Evolution, in its playful and unhurried way, took one brilliant idea, flight, and remixed it over and over again. All told, paleontologists have identified around 130 species of pterosaurs so far, each representing its own experiment in how to live in the sky. But those are only the ones we've found. The fossil record is notoriously stingy, especially for creatures with light, hollow bones that crush easily and rarely fossilize well. The real number may have been 2, 3, or even 5 times that. The Cretaceous era might have held as many as 300 species fluttering, gliding, and soaring across the globe, an entire airborne ecosystem of diversity and design. It didn't start that way, of course. In the Triassic period, when pterosaurs first appeared, there were probably only about 10 or so distinct species. There were the pioneers, the prototypes, the rough sketches of what flight could become. Small creatures with wingspans measured in mere centimeters. They lived along the coasts and lagoons of the ancient world. These early flyers, dainty, wiry, and delicate, were the prototypes of the grand sky civilizations that would follow. From those humble beginnings, evolution began to play its favorite game, variation. Each generation, each subtle genetic shuffle, added a new twist. A slightly longer wing here, a stronger jaw there, a bony crest on one, an extra tooth on another. In time, these tiny differences added up to astonishing diversity. By the Jurassic period, the sky was becoming crowded with variety. Pterosaurs were branching into dozens of forms, some adapted to forest canopies, others to open coasts, others still to inland lakes or high cliffs. And as they explored new habitats, they evolved into new species. By the Cretaceous, the pterosaur family tree had become a veritable jungle of branches, some fine and delicate, others thick and ancient. The number of species had ballooned to perhaps 50 or 60 at once, each one perfectly tuned to its particular environment. There were tiny insect hunters with wingspans no longer than your arm, and giants that could cast shadows over entire sandbars. The Earth had quite literally filled its skies with possibility. It's tempting to imagine the world then as an eternal summer of wings. If you were standing on a Cretaceous cliff somewhere above the sea, you might see dozens of species in a single view, some gliding high and silent, some darting low over the surf, others perched on the rocks, cleaning their beaks or fussing over their crests. In the forests behind you, smaller pterosaurs would be flitting through the canopy, snapping at insects or scavenging bits of meat. The sky, the land, the sea, all were connected by wings. But the diversity of pterosaurs wasn't just about numbers, it was about scale. The range of sizes among them was something truly extraordinary. The smallest known pterosaurs, like the tiny Myrmecolopterus, had wingspans of just about 20 centimeters, about the size of a sparrow. It may have lived among trees, hopping and gliding from branch to branch, feeding on insects that hovered in the warm air. Its bones were so thin and fragile that it must have weighed only a few dozen grams. And then there were the giants. By the end of their reign, some pterosaurs had reached wingspans of 10, even 12 meters, as wide as a small aircraft. Imagine one of those, say a Quetzalcoatlus or its kin, soaring overhead, its body the size of a giraffe's, its wings wide enough to darken the sun, a creature that could lift from the ground with a vaulting leap and vanish into the clouds in a few beats. These were not mere animals, they were airborne architecture, living monuments to evolution's ambition. Between those extremes lay an astonishing array of forms. Some were built like long-winged gliders, designed to cruise effortlessly for miles. Others had shorter, broader wings for quick bursts of speed and maneuverability. Some had heads longer than their torsos, others tiny skulls with enormous eyes. A few were toothless, others had hundreds of fine, comb-like teeth for filtering food from the water. There were pterosaurs with tails tipped by diamond-shaped rudders, and others with tails so short they might have seemed an afterthought. Nature in this era was clearly having fun, and as for where they lived, everywhere. Pterosaurs were global citizens. Fossils had been found on every continent, from the sands of Africa to the cliffs of England, from the deserts of Mongolia to the chalk plains of Texas. Some species even lived near the poles, suggesting that they could tolerate cooler climates or migrate with the seasons. From tropical lagoons to inland plains, from high cliffs to island chains, they occupied the full range of terrestrial skies. Each habitat brought its own challenges, and each challenge forged new adaptations. Coastal pterosaurs tended to be larger, their wings longer and narrower, built for gliding over open water. Inland species were often smaller, more agile, darting through forests or hovering near lakes. Those that lived near the poles may have developed thicker layers of pycnofibers, their hair-like body covering to keep warm during cold nights. The variety was dazzling not just in shape and size, but in lifestyle and behavior. If you were to map out all known pterosaurs across the world, the result would look like a galaxy of wings. Europe during the Jurassic and Cretaceous was a hotspot of diversity, home to species like Pterodactylus, Germanodactylus, and Ornithocheirus. North America boasted the great soaring forms of Pteranodon and its relatives. Asia, meanwhile, produced some of the most bizarre species ever discovered. Long-crested, toothy, and often flamboyantly designed, like Tapejara, whose head crest looked like it was halfway to becoming a sailboat. South America gave us giants, Africa, elegance, Australia, endurance. Wherever there was sky, there were pterosaurs to fill it. This global distribution tells us something profound about how adaptable they were. Despite their fragile appearance, pterosaurs were survivors. Their light frames and aerodynamic designs allowed them to travel long distances, perhaps even across oceans. They may have followed coastlines, migrating between feeding and nesting grounds. Some species likely formed colonies on cliffs or islands, safe from ground predators. Others may have lived solitary lives, drifting from one hunting ground to another. The variation extended beyond biology into behavior. Some pterosaurs may have been social, nesting in groups, their cries echoing across the cliffs like seabirds today. Others might have been solitary hunters, stalking their prey in silence. Some hunted during the day, their eyes keen for movement in the glare of the sun. Others, with larger eyes adapted for low light, may have flown at dusk or dawn, claiming the cool hours between heat and darkness. The number of species, then, isn't just a statistic. It's a testament to the flexibility of flight. Evolution didn't just invent wings once and stop there. It kept refining them, tinkering with design, changing angles, proportions, and strategies. The result was not one pterosaur, but a whole civilization of them, spanning millions of years and every conceivable environment. When scientists count roughly 130 known species, what they're really counting are the echoes of experiments, each one a success story, at least for a time. 10 species in the early days of the Triassic, became dozens in the Jurassic, then exploded into as many as 50 to 60 during the Cretaceous, the golden peak of pterosaur diversity. Each was a note in the grand symphony of flight, each shaped by its environment and the quiet demands of survival. It's humbling to realize how much we don't know. Fossilization favors luck and circumstance. Many species surely lived and died without leaving a single trace. The world's pterosaur record is like a half-remembered melody, enough to recognize the tune, but not every note. Still, what we do have is remarkable. From tiny skeletons preserved in fine limestone to colossal wing bones embedded in desert rock, every fossil adds another page to the story. And if you think 30 species sounds like a lot, consider that this was achieved across a time span of more than 160 million years. That's longer than mammals have been around, longer than flowers have existed, longer than Mount Everest has been a mountain. For all that time, pterosaurs evolved, adapted and diversified. They were not a brief experiment, they were a dynasty. Imagine a world where, at any given moment, hundreds of species of flying reptiles shared the sky, some tracing thermals high above mountain ranges, others fluttering among tropical trees, others gliding over prehistoric seas. To a time traveler, it would have looked like the greatest air show Earth has ever staged. And if Earth had a voice, and who's to say it doesn't, it might have looked up at its glittering, buzzing, swooping sky and whispered, "Diversify, little ones. There's room for everyone." The pterosaurs took that advice to heart. They diversified in size, shape, diet, and behavior until they occupied every niche available to a creature that could fly. They became the insect of the vertebrate world, ubiquitous, adaptable, and endlessly inventive. They turned the sky into a living mosaic, a moving landscape of scale and silhouette. Today, when scientists catalogue them, they don't just see bones and names, they see a pattern of resilience and creativity. 10 species became 100, and each of those represented a story of adaptation to heat and cold, of migration across ancient oceans, of evolution's endless artistry. The smallest pterosaurs flitted through ferns, the largest glided between clouds. Together, they wrote an epic of air, a saga that covered the entire planet. Their diversity wasn't an accident, it was a conversation with the Earth itself, a long dialogue between form and function, possibility and constraint. So yes, the textbooks say about 130 species, but in truth there were more, far more. There were species that hunted over inland lakes, species that scavenged carrion on beaches, species that soared over forests, and species that danced with the wind just for the joy of it. There were wings of every shape and size and bones built for every kind of flight. And though their fossils now sleep in stone, the idea they embodied still lingers. Diversity is not chaos, it is life's way of staying alive. The pterosaurs proved that over and over again, across epochs and continents. If you listen closely, perhaps on a warm day when the wind moves just right, you might almost hear it, the soft echo of wings, hundreds of them, layered in the air like chords in a song. A reminder that once, long ago, the sky was not the quiet expanse we know today, but a bustling, chattering, living world, where 30 kinds of creatures shared the wind. And somewhere in that imagined sky, the earth itself might have smiled and said, with amused affection, "Enough counting, my little flyers. You're everywhere, and that's exactly how I wanted it." Rhamphorhynchus, the early winged pioneer, long before the skies were filled with giants, before vast wings cast shadows over oceans and continents, there fluttered a smaller, humbler creature, a pioneer of the prehistoric airways. Its name was Rhamphorhynchus, a pterosaur of modest size but immense importance. At just about 1 meter long from beak to tail, it may not sound like much, yet it was among the first true masters of flight, a creature that helped define what it meant to live between earth and sky. Picture it now, the world some 160 million years ago, in the late Triassic to early Jurassic. The land is warm and lush, dotted with conifers and ferns. The air hums with the sound of insects, thick buzzing clouds of them. Along a rocky coastline, the sea glitters under the young sun, and there, just above the waves, a Rhamphorhynchus swoops low, its wings cutting smooth arcs through the air. It's small, no bigger than a crow, with a wingspan perhaps 1 meter wide, but there's elegance in its design. Its body is covered, not in feathers, but in fine, hair-like filaments called pycnofibers, giving it the faint look of a fuzzed fruit bat. Its wings are stretched membranes of skin, sinew, and muscle, taut between an elongated fourth finger and its body. Every flap and glide is a study in control, delicate, precise, and astonishingly efficient. And then there's that tail. Oh, that magnificent tail. Long, stiff, and tipped with a diamond-shaped vein, it trails behind like a living banner. You can almost imagine it waving proudly in the air, like the flag of some early sky nation. But it wasn't for decoration alone. This tail was a vital tool, an aerodynamic rudder that kept Rhamphorhynchus stable as it banked and swooped above the waves. While later pterosaurs would lose their tails in favor of agility, Rhamphorhynchus needed his, for balance. It was his steering wheel in the open air, and perhaps his calling card to anyone watching from below. Its name, meaning beak snout, fits it well. The head is long and narrow, filled with sharp, interlocking teeth that jut slightly forward, like the tines of a comb. These were no simple insect-trapping teeth. They were tools of precision. With them, Rhamphorhynchus could snatch flying insects from the air, or pluck fish from the water surface with a quick snap of its jaws. Its eyes, large and forward-facing, gave it excellent vision, perfect for spotting movement in the chaotic shimmer of sunlit water. Despite its aerodynamic grace, Rhamphorhynchus wasn't a high-altitude flyer. It preferred to stay low, close to the water or the coastline, gliding just above the waves where insects and small fish were plentiful. This was a flyer of the in-between world, too agile for the land, too light for the depths, forever skimming the border between them. You could think of it as the Jurassic version of a swallow or a modern tern, fast, elegant, and endlessly busy. Its life along the coast was a delicate dance with the elements. The warm air rising from the sea gave it lift. The winds blowing in from offshore guided its glides. When the air was still, it flapped its wings in short bursts, relying on agility more than endurance. It might circle over shallow waters, waiting for a ripple, a hint of prey, then dive in a shallow swoop, snatching a small fish before veering up again. Sometimes it hunted near cliffs, where insects gathered in swarms. In those moments, Rhamphorhynchus became a streak of motion, wings beating rapidly, tail vein flicking like a rudder as it darted through the haze of its tiny prey. Its anatomy was a masterclass in evolutionary engineering. The bones were light but strong, built with internal struts that resisted bending. Its breastbone was well developed, anchoring the muscles needed for flight. The wings themselves were marvels of design, flexible but sturdy, able to change shape mid-air for subtle shifts in lift and drag. The membranes were alive with blood vessels and nerve endings, allowing for fine-tuned control. Each adjustment of its wings was as precise as the fingers of a pianist, finding the right chord. On the ground, though, Rhamphorhynchus was less impressive. Its legs were slender, its gait a bit awkward. Like many pterosaurs, it probably walked on all fours, using its wing joints as forelimbs when it wasn't airborne. It could shuffle or hop along the sand, perhaps to find nesting sites or move between feeding grounds. But the land was never its true home. Its bones, its muscles, its very essence were built for air. When it came time to reproduce, Rhamphorhynchus likely sought out safe, secluded areas along the coast, perhaps sandy beaches or rocky shelves above the reach of tides. Evidence from fossilized eggs of other pterosaurs suggests that these creatures laid soft-shelled eggs, more like those of modern reptiles than birds. They probably buried them under sand or vegetation for warmth and protection, and when the young hatched, they may have been able to fly almost immediately, tiny determined replicas of their parents, instinctively drawn to the open air. It's an image both endearing and astonishing. A clutch of small, leathery hatchlings emerging from the sand, blinking at the sunlight, and within days, testing their wings. Their first flights would have been clumsy, uncertain things, but the instinct to rise above the ground was irresistible. Nature, as always, had no patience for hesitation. Fly or be eaten. The world was not kind to those who stayed still. Though Rhamphorhynchus lived millions of years before humanity, it might have been a familiar sight to anyone standing on an ancient shore. Its behavior mirrors that of modern seabirds. The same swoops, the same dives, the same patient hovering before a strike. You could imagine a fisherman from that era, if one had existed, looking up and thinking, it's after the same meal I am. In a sense, Rhamphorhynchus was the world's first fisherman of the skies. But unlike seabirds, it had no feathers, no warm insulating coat. Instead, its fine pycno fibers served a similar role, trapping heat and maintaining body temperature. This fuzz gave it a soft, almost mammalian look, strange and endearing, a prehistoric hybrid of lizard and bat. The warm climate of its coastal habitats likely made this light covering sufficient, keeping it agile without burdening it with weight. The more we study its fossils, the more fascinating this little creature becomes. Specimens from Germany's famous Solnhofen limestone preserve even the impressions of its wing membranes and tail vein, frozen in stone like ancient flight plans. In some, the outline of its soft tissues is so clear you can almost see the texture of its skin, the curve of its wings mid-flap. These fossils are snapshots of motion records of a life caught mid-flight eternalized in rock. Its fossil record also offers hints of behavior. Some Rhamphorhynchus specimens have been found with small fish bones inside their rib cages, clear evidence of their diet. Others show signs of healed injuries, proof that these animals lived long enough to recover from accidents or predators, and there are even fossils showing possible predation, one famously depicting a Rhamphorhynchus locked in combat with a fish that dragged it into the water. Evolution, as ever, played for keeps. Still, there's humor in its story too. For all its grace in the air, Rhamphorhynchus must have been a little ridiculous on land. Wings half-folded, tail sticking out, beak snapping at anything that moved. You can imagine it waddling along the beach, perhaps tripping over a rock, letting out a frustrated squawk before taking to the air again, where it belonged. If it could talk, it might have muttered something like, "Ground's overrated anyway." And truly it was right. The air was its true element. Up there, Rhamphorhynchus was weightless, effortless, timeless. Its long tail vein shimmered behind it, its wings flexed and curved with the wind, and its keen eyes scanned the surface below for movement. Every glide was both survival and art. Its small size made it agile, but also vulnerable. It had to be wary of larger predators, both from above and below. Marine reptiles might lunge from the water, while early dinosaurs could snatch the unwary from the shore. But Rhamphorhynchus had its defenses: speed, awareness, and an intimate understanding of the currents. It could bank sharply, turn on a dime, and vanish into the glare of the sun before danger even realized it was there. In evolutionary terms, Rhamphorhynchus represents an important bridge. It belongs to the Rhamphorhynchoids, the earlier group of pterosaurs characterized by their long tails and toothed jaws. Later, during the Cretaceous, their descendants, the pterodactyloids, would evolve shorter tails, larger wings, and different hunting strategies. But without the early innovators like Rhamphorhynchus, those later masters of the sky might never have taken off. Think of it as the Wright brothers of the Mesozoic, a smaller, scrappier pioneer that made all future flights possible. It tested the limits, refined the mechanics, and proved that sustained flight wasn't just a fluke of evolution, it was a viable way to live. We often celebrate the great giants of prehistory, the thunderous dinosaurs and the towering pterosaurs with wingspans like airplanes. But there's something profoundly moving about these smaller, earlier forms. They remind us that every great story starts small, that before the sky was ruled by giants, it was first explored by creatures like Rhamphorhynchus, small, curious, and brave enough to trust the air. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine it. The coastal winds of an ancient world, the rhythmic crash of waves, the soft hum of insects rising from the shore. Then a shadow darts across the sand, a slim body, a flash of leathery wings, a long tail fluttering like a banner. It glides just above the water, dips low, catches a fish, and rises again into the shimmering heat. For millions of years, that was the view on countless Jurassic mornings. And though Rhamphorhynchus has long vanished from the earth, its spirit lingers in every bird that skims the sea, in every breeze that whispers over the coast. It was among the first to take the risk to look at the wind not as an obstacle, but as a home. If the earth could speak, perhaps it would remember this small, daring creature with a fond sigh and say, "You flew when no one else dared to. You were small, but you carried the sky in your bones. Thank you, little one, for proving that the air could be conquered." And then, somewhere in that long-vanished dawn, a Rhamphorhynchus would rise again, wings shimmering against the light, tail streaming behind, vanishing into the endless blue. The first of its kind, and the first to truly belong to the wind. Pterodactylus, the little wanderer of the Jurassic sky. There are creatures in the story of life that seem to hold entire eras in their bones, and Pterodactylus is one of them. Small enough to perch on your arm, light enough to ride the breeze, and elegant enough to leave a fossil impression that looks like a prehistoric etching of flight itself. It was one of the first pterosaurs ever discovered, and for a long time it was the face of the entire family, the original flying reptile. But beyond its fame, Pterodactylus was a real, living, breathing inhabitant of the Jurassic world, a nimble hunter of fish and insects that turned the coastal skies into its playground. Imagine standing by a lagoon in what is now southern Germany, 50 million years ago. The air is thick and humid, heavy with the smell of salt and sun-warmed algae. The shallow water glimmers, filled with darting fish and soft-bodied creatures that ripple beneath the surface. A few dragonflies the size of your hand hover near the reeds. Then, with a sudden flutter of wings, a shadow glides across the water. It dips low, its reflection tracing a perfect mirror image in the ripples below. That shadow belongs to Pterodactylus anticus, a small pterosaur of about 1 meter from wingtip to wingtip, with a body no longer than a pigeon's and a head that seems almost too large for its frame. Its skull is long and narrow, tipped with a pointed beak lined with short conical teeth tools for gripping slippery prey. Its eyes are large and sharp, tuned to the glint of movement below. With a sudden flick of its wings, it adjusts its trajectory, dips its beak into the water, and emerges with a wriggling fish clamped between its jaws. This, more or less, was its life, a ceaseless ballet of motion, a dance between air and water. Pterodactylus was born to fly low, fast and far. Its wings were sleek and narrow, built for long glides rather than tight turns. It was the aerial equivalent of a swift cruising along the coastline, covering great distances in search of food. Unlike its earlier long-tailed cousins, Pterodactylus had a short tail, a compact design that allowed it greater control in open air. Where its ancestors needed rudders, it relied on precision. Its bones were light, thin-walled, and marvelously strong, evolution's own carbon fiber. Each wing was formed from a membrane of skin, stretched across an elongated fourth finger that could reach nearly as long as its entire body. This living sail caught every whisper of wind, every shimmer of thermal lift rising from the warm coastal cliffs. Pterodactylus didn't fight the air, it conversed with it. It knew how to bend, twist, and yield in just the right ways to make gravity its servant. When the wind was kind, it could glide for hours. It might follow the coastline of the ancient Tethys Sea, tracing its way along lagoons and islands, riding the thermals that rose from sun-baked stone. Its wings would barely move, each adjustment subtle, almost invisible. From a distance, you might think it was motionless, a silent scrap of sky given life. But when the wind turned fickle or the hunt demanded speed, those slender wings could beat in quick bursts, sharp and deliberate. A sudden swoop, a splash, a quick meal, and then back to the endless glide. Pterodactylus was a creature of the margins, the narrow line where air meets water, where life flickers between elements. It hunted not by brute force but by finesse. Its short, conical teeth, about 90 of them in total, lined the tip of its jaws like the fine teeth of a comb, perfect for gripping small fish or soft-bodied creatures like squid. Some paleontologists believe it might have fed, much like modern terns or skimmers, flying just above the surface and dipping its beak to snatch prey in passing. Others imagine it wading along shallow shores using quick snaps of its head to grab what swam too close. Either way, its world was one of constant motion, the shimmer of water, the whisper of wind, the eternal chase between hunter and hunted. Despite its modest size, Pterodactylus had a surprisingly large head, nearly half the length of its body. This oversized skull wasn't just for show. It housed keen eyes and a specialized jaw designed for quick strikes. Its brain, too, was relatively advanced for its time. Fossil endocasts suggest that its cerebellum, the part responsible for balance and coordination, was well developed. This makes sense. Flight at low altitudes over uneven terrain demands constant adjustments, subtle shifts of wing and tail. Pterodactylus wasn't just flying, it was performing aerial acrobatics with the precision of an Olympic gymnast. In its time, the Jurassic coastlines were bustling ecosystems. Fish darted in schools beneath the surface. Ammonites spiraled, mollusks drifted with the tides. Small dinosaurs prowled the beaches, leaving footprints in the soft mud. And above it all, Pterodactylus carved invisible trails through the air, the first vertebrate to truly make the sky its home. It wasn't just a creature of the day, either. Some scientists speculate that different species of Pterodactylus may have divided their activity between daylight and dusk, avoiding competition by hunting at different times. Its large eyes could have helped it see in low light, making it one of the earliest aerial predators to exploit the golden hours when the world glowed and the air cooled. Imagine dozens of them gliding through the sunset, wings painted gold by the dying light, skimming the surface of ancient lagoons as insects rose in swarms above the water. It must have been a sight to rival any modern evening sky. And where did these little flyers make their homes? Not in trees, surprisingly. Fossil evidence suggests that Pterodactylus likely nested in coastal caves or crevices, safe, shadowy places tucked into cliffs where the sea breeze could cool the air and the eggs would be sheltered from both sun and predators. There, they probably laid small, soft-shelled eggs, much like those of modern reptiles. The females might have buried them in sand or covered them with vegetation to keep them warm. The hatchlings, like many of their kin, would have been ready to fly almost from the start. It's easy to picture it, A dim cave near the shore, the sound of waves echoing softly against the walls. Inside, a cluster of small, leathery eggs begins to quiver. One cracks open, then another. Tiny, damp creatures emerge, wide-eyed, squeaking softly, already stretching their little wings. Within days, they will be testing the air, clambering to the cave's mouth, and leaping into the wind for the first time. Some will fall, some will flutter, and a few will catch the current just right and soar out over the sea, vanishing into the blue. For all its grace in flight, life for Pterodactylus was not without danger. The Jurassic was full of predators. Large marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, lurked beneath the waves, waiting for anything that came too low. On land, small carnivorous dinosaurs hunted along the shores, quick and sharp-eyed. And storms, sudden and fierce, could sweep across the coast, grounding the unwary and dashing them against the rocks. Pterodactylus had to be clever, alert, and endlessly adaptable, but it had one advantage no predator could match: the sky itself. With a leap and a beat of its wings, it could leave danger behind, rising into the free, open air. Scientists often describe Pterodactylus as small, but smallness in nature often conceals mastery. This was a creature perfectly scaled for its world. Its wings allowed it to exploit niches that larger animals couldn't reach. It could navigate narrow coves, slip through cliffs, and glide over shallow lagoons where bigger pterosaurs would have struggled. Its light frame made it a master of efficiency, able to travel great distances on minimal energy. It didn't need to be a giant to own the sky. It simply needed to be clever with the wind. And clever it was, its fossils, exquisitely preserved in the fine limestone of Solnhofen, tell a story of finesse. The delicate impressions of its wings, even the faint outline of pycnofiber fuzz, remain etched in stone, like the memory of a vanished breath. Some specimens show the position of its wings at rest, suggesting how it folded them neatly against its body when landing or walking. Others capture its long, graceful skull, its teeth still sharp after 150 million years. These fossils are so vivid that they almost seem to move tiny ghosts caught mid-flight, waiting for the right gust to carry them off again. For all its scientific importance, there's also something irresistibly charming about Pterodactylus. It was a creature that seemed to combine precision with personality, a small, darting shadow of intelligence and instinct. You can imagine it squabbling over fish with its peers, flapping indignantly when one stole a meal from another, or puffing itself up in a prehistoric version of "look how high I can fly." Nature's humor was alive even then, and maybe that's why Pterodactylus feels so timeless. It wasn't a giant, nor a monster. It was a creature of elegance, rhythm, and adaptability. It didn't dominate its world by force, but by skill. It was a reminder, even millions of years ago, that mastery of the environment doesn't always come from size or strength, but from understanding the world's subtler languages, the way the air moves, the way light glints off the water, the way timing can mean everything. If you stood on a Jurassic beach at dawn, you might see them taking off in small groups from their caves, the first light catching the edges of their wings. They would fly low over the sea, their reflections flickering across the rippling surface. Every few minutes one would dip, snap up a fish, and climb back into the air. Their calls, a series of short, sharp cries, would echo faintly over the waves. The sound of an ancient morning, when the world still smelled of salt and fern. In those moments the earth must have watched them with quiet pride. They were its little explorers, its featherless birds, its inventors of distance. The planet had whispered, "Go on, fly farther," and they had listened. And so they did. Across the length of the Jurassic coastlines, Pterodactylus soared, small but unstoppable, a thread of motion woven into the fabric of the sky. They flew through storms, across lagoons, over forests of conifers and ferns, always following the promise of air and food and freedom. Their fossils now sleep in stone, but their story is as alive as the wind that once carried them. They remind us that flight began not with grandeur, but with curiosity, that the first creatures to explore the air were not colossal titans, but little dreamers with wings. If the earth could speak again, watching those delicate silhouettes skimming the ancient waves, it might have smiled and said, with affectionate amusement, "Go on, little traveller, the world is wide." The wind will show you the way. And with a flick of its slender wings, Pterodactylus would answer, not in words but in motion, lifting effortlessly into the air, gliding out toward the glittering horizon, a tiny ambassador of a vast and waiting sky. Pteranodon, the famous lord of the ancient sky. If you were to look up a pterosaur in the imagination of humanity, the creature you'd most likely see is Pteranodon, that elegant silhouette with vast bat-like wings and a long backward sweeping crest, soaring effortlessly above a prehistoric sea. For more than a century, Pteranodon has captured the collective dream of flight. It's the icon of the Mesozoic skies, the banner of an age when the air was alive with leathery wings. But beneath its fame lies a story far richer than any movie poster or museum mount could tell. A story of power, distance, and the boundless ambition of evolution. Let's begin by setting the scene. It is the late Cretaceous, about 85 million years ago. North America is divided in two by the Western Interior Seaway, a vast inland ocean that stretches from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. The air is warm and salty, heavy with the scent of algae and life. The sun blazes high above an endless horizon of blue. Below, the waves shimmer with silver flashes of fish and ancient marine reptiles. And far above, with wings outstretched nearly 6 meters across, a pteranodon rides the thermals, silent, steady, and utterly at home in the heavens. From tip to tip, its wings are as wide as a small airplane's. Its body, by contrast, is lean, no more than the size of a turkey. Nature had stripped it down to the essentials: bone, muscle, and air. Everything about it was optimized for one purpose: endurance. The pteranodon was built not just to fly, but to travel. Its wings were long and narrow, shaped like those of a modern albatross. This design was perfect for dynamic soaring, using the differences in wind speed above the waves to gain lift without constant flapping. With minimal effort, it could glide for hours, perhaps days, across open water. Each subtle tilt of its wings was an act of calculation, finding the invisible rivers of air that flowed between sea and sky. Unlike many of its pterosaur relatives, Pteranodon had no teeth. Its beak was long, pointed, and razor-smooth, a perfect adaptation for snatching fish from the surface of the ocean. When it spotted a school shimmering below, it would dive in a shallow arc, skimming the water with a swift strike of its beak. A flash of motion, a ripple, and then it was climbing again, the fish caught crosswise in its jaws. No struggle, no splash, just precision. Its name means winged and toothless, and it wore that title like a badge of evolution's efficiency. Its head crest, however, was anything but practical, or so it might seem at first glance. Rising high and sweeping back behind its skull, the crest could stretch half the length of its body. Some species had slender, blade-like crests, others carried ones shaped like fans or fins. Scientists still debate their exact function. Perhaps they helped with balance, acting as a counterweight to the long beak. Or maybe they served as aerodynamic stabilizers, fine-tuning flight. But there's another, more delightful possibility. They were displays, flamboyant ornaments for courtship, like the feathered plumes of birds today. If so, the skies of the Cretaceous weren't just full of gliders. They were full of peacocks, of the air, showing off their headgear to impress potential mates. It's hard not to imagine it. The low Cretaceous sun glinting off a pteranodon's crest as it circles above the waves, its shadow rippling over the water below. Another appears nearby, perhaps a rival or a companion. They wheel together, mirroring each other's movements, a prehistoric dance of flight and flirtation. The sea murmurs beneath them, the wind hums around them, and the air becomes an arena of grace. For all its elegance, though, Pteranodon's life was anything but easy. To live on the wing meant to live by motion. It was a creature of endurance, a marathoner of the sky. The open ocean offered endless food, but also endless risk. Storms could rise in minutes, tossing the waves into chaos. A pteranodon caught in a squall had few options. It could ride the wind and prey, or dive toward an island and hope to outlast the tempest. Fossil evidence suggests that these pterosaurs nested on remote islands, safe havens free from most predators, though not free from hardship. You can imagine them there, lining the cliffs like seabirds, their leathery wings folded tight, their crests catching the sea breeze. The females, Smaller and lighter might have tended to nests of soft-shelled eggs, buried in the sand or tucked into cracks in the rock. The males, with larger crests, might have stood guard or soared above, scanning for intruders. And somewhere among the rocks, newly hatched pteranodon chicks, tiny, fuzzy versions of their parents, would stumble toward the cliff's edge, drawn by instinct to the wind. Their first flights, awkward and perilous, would begin almost as soon as they could stretch their wings. They were born to fly. Everything in their design whispered it. The hollow bones that made their bodies light, the air sacs that filled them like biological balloons, the massive flight muscles anchored to a keeled breastbone. Even their respiration was specialized, circulating air through the bones themselves to regulate temperature and buoyancy. They were as much air as flesh, a union of biology and physics, so elegant it might have made Leonardo da Vinci weep. But don't let their delicate bones fool you. Pteranodons were tough. Surviving over the vast Cretaceous oceans required not just grace, but endurance and adaptability. They likely fed not only on fish but on squid, crustaceans, and even carrion floating at the surface. They could travel hundreds, perhaps thousands of kilometers between nesting islands and feeding grounds, following the currents of the sea and the winds of the sky. In a sense, they lived as perpetual travelers, always moving, always chasing the horizon. If you could stand on one of those islands and watch a pteranodon take off, it would be a sight to remember. It wouldn't flap like a bird or launch from a standing jump. Instead, it would crouch tense and then vault forward on all fours, a powerful leap using both its hind legs and its muscular arms. Its wings would snap open in mid-motion, catching the wind in a perfect upward sweep. For a moment it would hang between land and sky, then lift, effortless. The island would fall away beneath it, and the sea would open before it like an invitation. Up there, above the Cretaceous seaway, the pteranodon was a monarch. The sky belonged to it, utterly. It moved with an understanding of the wind that no earthbound creature could fathom. To watch one soar was to see the very concept of flight, perfected, not the frantic flapping of survival, but the serene mastery of motion. It glided where it wished, it fed where it pleased, it returned when it chose, and yet there was humor in it too. For all its majesty, life in the sky came with awkward moments. Landing, for instance, was not its forte. Picture this. After hours of gliding, a pteranodon approaches its nesting cliff, adjusting its wings, flapping once or twice to slow down. A gust hits at the wrong moment, and whoops, it stumbles into a comical half-hop, half-slide along the rocks before righting itself with ruffled dignity. Even nature's finest pilots have their bloopers. Still, the laughter doesn't diminish the awe. Pteranodon was the culmination of tens of millions of years of aerodynamic evolution. It was light, strong, and astonishingly efficient. Its wing structure, especially the elongated fourth finger that supported the membrane, was both simple and sublime. Engineers today study pterosaur anatomy to understand flight dynamics better, the creatures anticipated by nature, what humans would later design through mathematics. Their bones, found in places like Kansas and Alabama, tell the story of an animal that dominated the open air above prehistoric seas. The fossils are delicate but widespread, often preserved in what used to be oceanic sediment. Some even contain traces of wing membrane impressions, showing that the thin skin stretched all the way to their hind limbs, forming a vast, flexible surface. This membrane was not dead tissue, but a living, muscular structure, capable of adjusting tension and angle mid-flight. It was, in every sense, alive to the wind. Scientists believed pteranodons had good eyesight, capable of spotting fish or floating prey from hundreds of meters away. Their brains were small compared to modern birds, but well suited to flight, processing visual information rapidly and coordinating complex movements. In a world with no radar and no instruments, pteranodon was its own navigation system, guided by the rhythm of air currents and perhaps even the magnetic fields of the Earth itself. When storms gathered or the seasons shifted, pteranodons likely migrated long distances, riding favorable winds to warmer waters. Picture flocks of them soaring across the western interior seaway, dozens, perhaps hundreds, each one a sleek silhouette against a blazing Cretaceous sky. They weren't noisy creatures, their calls may have been low, nasal sounds, carried by the wind and mixed with the distant crash of waves. but their presence alone would have been enough to fill the sky with life. In their time, they were among the most successful flyers Earth had ever seen. And for good reason, they combined the lightness of air with the endurance of the ocean. They didn't just fly, they lived in flight. The sea was their pantry, the sky their road, the islands their rest stops. Each one of them was a voyager of both worlds, slipping between elements as easily as breathing. There's a certain poetry to the way they must have looked when resting, wings folded, crests angled back, eyes half closed as the breeze ruffled their skin. One imagines a quiet island at dusk, with dozens of pteranodons perched along the cliffs, watching the last light fade over the sea. They'd eaten well, flown far, and tomorrow they'd rise again to follow the sun. Their fossils, beautifully preserved, are more than relics. They are echoes. Each delicate bone, each wing impression, is a signature of motion. They remind us of what it means to be free, not in the abstract, but in the physical, bone-deep sense of freedom. For millions of years, Pteranodon wrote its story across the sky, and even now that story lingers in the flight of seabirds, in the gliding arcs of albatrosses tracing the same winds. To think of Pteranodon is to think of the perfect balance between grace and endurance. It didn't just survive in the air, it thrived there, making the atmosphere its domain, and when it finally landed, awkward and earthbound, perhaps it looked out to the horizon and felt the same tug that aviators and dreamers feel today, the urge to rise again. If the earth could have spoken to this master of the wind, perhaps it would have said with quiet pride, "Fly far, my child. The ocean is wide, but the sky is wider still." And with that, the pteranodon would have launched itself once more, wings opening like a sail to catch the rising thermal, crest gleaming in the sunlight, vanishing into the boundless blue. A symbol not of domination but of harmony, the eternal partnership between life and air, between the dream of flight and the reality of wind. Quetzalcoatlus, the giant of the ancient sky. There are giants in every age, creatures that push the limits of what life can be, that make the world feel suddenly smaller by their sheer existence. In the final act of the Age of Reptiles, when dinosaurs still thundered across the land and the seas were filled with monsters, there was one giant who claimed the sky itself. Its name was Quetzalcoatlus, and it was unlike anything that had ever flown before or since. Imagine a creature so vast that its wings stretched nearly 11 meters from tip to tip, wider than a modern fighter jet's wings. Its standing height, when folded, rivaled that of a giraffe. Its long, sharp beak could have impaled a small animal in an instant, and its hollow bones, though light, supported a creature weighing perhaps 200 to 250 kilograms. It was not merely a flyer, it was an airborne colossus, the very embodiment of the sky made flesh. We are in the late Cretaceous. About 68 million years ago, the world hums with life, but it is restless, nearing the end of an era. The air is warm, the continents have drifted into familiar shapes, and inland seas are shrinking. Across what is now Texas, vast plains stretch beneath a golden sun, dotted with rivers and shallow lakes. The land smells of mud, heat, and the breath of distant storms. A shadow passes overhead, broad, deliberate, and silent. For a heartbeat, the light dims. You look up, and there it is, a Quetzalcoatlus, soaring low over the landscape like a living aircraft, its wings slicing through the sky with the ease of centuries of evolution. Despite its scale, this creature was no clumsy brute. Its body was built for precision. Each wing was a masterpiece of biology, thin membranes of skin and muscle stretched over an immense fourth finger, supported by a lattice of fine tendons. The membrane connected along the sides of its body and even to its hind limbs, forming an enormous, living sail. When spread, those wings caught not just air but opportunity. Its name, Quetzalcoatlus, comes from the Aztec feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatlus, a fitting tribute for a creature that seemed half dragon, half divinity. The fossil bones, first discovered in Texas in the 1970s, were so immense that paleontologists initially struggled to believe they belonged to a flying animal. But they did. Somehow, impossibly, nature had crafted a reptile capable of soaring with a wingspan longer than most city buses. It's almost absurd, really. How could something so big even take off? Yet, like all of evolution's greatest works, Quetzalcoatlus solved the problem with genius. Instead of running to launch, it vaulted into the air using all four limbs. Its long, muscular forearms, those same arms that supported its wings, acted as catapults. With a single, explosive push, it hurled itself skyward, snapping open its wings in mid-motion. The updrafts did the rest. In seconds, it was aloft, climbing effortlessly above the plains. Once in the air, it didn't need to flap much. Its wings were made for soaring, riding thermals and wind currents that rippled across the warm Cretaceous landscape. It could stay airborne for hours, gliding over kilometers of terrain with the patience of a god surveying its domain. But unlike the ocean-going flyers that crossed great distances, Quetzalcoatlus was a local traveler. It preferred to stay near land, circling over rivers, lakes, and open fields, searching for food below. And what a hunter it must have been! With its long, pointed beak and keen eyesight, Quetzalcoatlus could spot movement from hundreds of meters in the air. When it saw a target, a small dinosaur perhaps, or a turtle basking by a riverbank, it would bank sharply, fold its wings, and dive. The rush of wind would be thunderous. Just before impact, it would open its wings to tow, strike with surgical precision, and seize its prey. A quick stab, a gulp, and then it was climbing again, leaving only dust and silence behind. Its diet was as varied as its range. It likely fed on fish, small reptiles, and even carrion. Some scientists imagine it stalking like a stork, striding through riverbeds on long, slender legs, using its beak to snatch prey from the mud. Others picture it scavenging like a vulture, landing near carcasses left by larger predators and jabbing into them with that spear-like snout. Whatever its methods, it was an apex opportunist, one of nature's most versatile eaters. Its head was astonishingly long, more than 2.5 meters from tip to base, and crowned with a subtle blade-like crest. Some speculate the crest helped balance the head during flight. Others think it may have been a display structure used in mating rituals or dominance shows. Picture two Quetzalcoatlus on an open plain, facing one another like dueling knights, their wings half open, crests glinting in the sunlight as they trumpet harsh booming calls across the wind. The ground would tremble as they took off again, circling each other in a display of aerial bravado. Despite its grandeur, Quetzalcoatlus wasn't invincible. Its sheer size was both a blessing and a curse. It could cover vast territory and intimidate almost anything below, but it needed open space to take off and land. A dense forest would have been a trap. A single misstep could break its fragile bones. That's why it preferred open plains, cliffs, and elevated terrain, places where it could launch into the air with room to spare. This preference shaped its entire life. It likely nested and bred on high ground, where its eggs and chicks were safe from floods and ground predators. Imagine a colony of them on a rocky plateau, dozens of the giants gathered in the wind, their nests, simple scrapes in the soil, each holding a few leathery eggs. When the sun rose, the adults would spread their enormous wings to catch the morning thermals, lifting one by one into the sky. Below, the chicks would watch, their tiny wings fluttering, already drawn to the promise of height. To stand near a Quetzalcoatlus in life would have been a humbling experience. At eye level, it would have towered over a human. Its neck alone was longer than a man's arm, and its wings, when folded, still loomed like great living sails. Its skin was likely a warm brown or grey, perhaps patterned for camouflage among the cliffs and plains. Its body, though massive, was light and efficient, a cathedral of bone and air. And then there's the sound. We can only guess what it might have been, but one imagines deep, resonant calls, carried for miles by the wind, half honk, half roar, echoing across the Cretaceous landscape. Perhaps they called to one another during flight, keeping contact as they circled over hunting grounds. Or maybe, like whales, their sounds were more than noise. They were communication, woven into the fabric of the sky. There's a certain paradox in Quetzalcoatlus. It was a creature of unimaginable power, yet it lived lightly on the world. Its bones were fragile, its body delicate, its existence balanced on the invisible physics of air. A single broken wing could end it. And yet, while it lasted, it ruled a domain no predator could touch. It was the embodiment of risk perfected, the reward of evolution's boldest gamble. Some scientists have argued that Quetzalcoatlus might have spent much of its time on the ground, walking efficiently on all fours. It could have stalked across the plains like a heron mixed with a giraffe, each step measured, each glance downward sharp with intent. And when it tired of walking, it could simply unfold its wings and rise above it all again. To be both master of the earth and the air, what more could evolution achieve? It's easy to be awed by the numbers. 12 meters long, 11 meters across, hundreds of kilograms in weight. But the true wonder lies in the idea that such a being could exist at all. Every flight it took was a defiance of gravity's tyranny, a balancing act between mass and motion. The physics of it are astounding. A creature this large shouldn't have been able to fly by human logic, and yet it did, and it did so gracefully. Nature, once again, out-engineered the engineers. At dusk, the sight must have been otherworldly. The sun dipping below the horizon, the plains bathed in orange light, and there, high above, a line of Quetzalcoatlus gliding homeward, their silhouettes enormous against the sky. Their shadows stretched across the earth like drifting clouds. Below, smaller animals might pause to watch, feeling the wind stirred by their passage. Perhaps the earth itself watched too, amused and proud. After all, what other planet could claim to have birthed such beings? If it could speak, it might have murmured softly, "Fly large, my child. The sky is wide enough for you." And fly they did. For millions of years, Quetzalcoatlus ruled the air above what is now North America, unmatched in scale or majesty. It witnessed the final days of the dinosaurs, the last great flowering of Mesozoic life, the sunsets of an era, and then, when the great extinction came, it vanished with the rest. Its wings folded forever, its bones sinking into the earth it had once surveyed from above. Today we find those bones and hold them in our hands, delicate, hollow, impossibly light. They feel more like the remnants of a dream than a creature, and perhaps that's what Quetzalcoatlus truly was. A dream made real, proof that even gravity has limits, if you dare enough. To think of it now is to feel both awe and tenderness. It was a monster, yes, but a beautiful one, a giant who touched the clouds and lived in the thin space between air and eternity. If you listen closely on a windy day, you might almost hear it, the slow beat of wings over distant plains, the whisper of a giant's shadow across the sun, and in that whisper, the earth's voice again, half laughter, half pride, saying to its greatest flyer, "You flew higher than any before you. You carried the sky on your back. Now rest, great one. The heavens remember you." And somewhere, in the silence of deep time, Quetzalcoatlus still soars forever caught between gravity and grace, the last and greatest giant of the ancient sky. The lives of the pterosaurs, flight, hunt, and the art of living on the wind. It is one thing to marvel at a fossil, to hold a delicate bone and imagine its owner gliding through ancient skies, but it is another to truly picture how these creatures lived. The pterosaurs were not just winged shapes in prehistory. They were vibrant, restless beings with habits, preferences, and social rhythms. They were, in a sense, the first masters of the art of living in the air. Close your eyes and imagine them alive again. The air warm and thick, the world greener, younger, more humid. The sound of insects hums across a lagoon. Waves crash gently on ancient shores. Then, rising from the cliffs in a rush of movement, come the pterosaurs. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, taking off together in a burst of leathery wings. The sky fills with motion. The light flashes off their membranes and the horizon becomes alive with silhouette. Flight was not merely something they did, it was who they were. Everything about their behavior began and ended with the wind. Their bones, hollow and light, gave them both fragility and freedom. Their vast wings, supported by that remarkable elongated fourth finger, made them creatures of endurance. They could cross distances that even modern seabirds would envy. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers of ocean or desert, without ever needing to land. They used the invisible structure of the sky the way we use roads. Warm air rising from sunlit ground became their elevators, cool breezes along cliffs, their highways. Some species glided close to the sea, others soared high over mountain thermals, turning lazy circles that lasted for hours. They had no engines, no feathers, no instruments, only instinct, the feel of air on skin, and a brain tuned by evolution to read the language of the wind. Imagine a flock of them, gliding together, their wings casting synchronized shadows over the sea. They would travel in lines or arcs, like migrating cranes, taking turns leading the group through invisible corridors of air. There is something deeply social in that vision. Pterosaurs not as solitary wanderers, but as communal travelers, companions on the great journeys between seasons and feeding grounds. Fossil sites across the world show hints of this: footprints gathered in clusters, nesting grounds packed closely together, bones preserved in what may have been ancient colonies. Perhaps, like seabirds today, they were creatures of ritual. Each year when the weather warmed and the air shimmered with life, they would rise as one and set out across the skies. They may have migrated thousands of kilometers, chasing fish-filled currents, or the clouds of insects that swarmed above ancient wetlands. From the coasts of the Tethys to the shores of inland lakes, they followed warmth like a living tide. And oh, how they hunted. Pterosaurs were vision-guided predators, eyes sharp as glass, brains wired for motion. They saw the glitter of fish beneath waves, the glint of insects at dusk, the faint flicker of movement across plains. Some hovered and dived like modern hawks, others skimmed the water's surface, dipping their beaks like nets. A few may have stalked shorelines on all fours, watching the shallows with patient stillness before striking with lightning speed. Their styles of hunting were as varied as their shapes. The small and nimble ones were aerial acrobats, snatching dragonflies or mayflies mid-flight. Larger ones became fishers cruising above rivers or open seas, diving in shallow arcs to pluck prey from the water's skin. Still others hunted small terrestrial animals, swooping down on unsuspecting lizards or scavenging along beaches. Evolution gave them wings not only to travel but to see the world from above, to spot patterns and movements invisible to those bound to the ground. There must have been moments of high drama, storms sweeping across the Cretaceous seas, waves rising like walls, wind howling through the air. The smaller flyers would cling to cliffs, wings folded tight, while the larger ones soared above the chaos, masters of turbulence. Perhaps they called to one another in those moments, strange cries carried by the gale. The air was their safety and their danger. From above they could avoid predators, but a torn wing or an unexpected gust could spell disaster. Yet they were resilient, their membranes healed, their instincts adapted, their bodies learned. They were creatures that had made a pact with the sky. Trust me, and I'll carry you. When it came to reproduction, pterosaurs brought that same blend of boldness and delicacy to the ground. Unlike the marine reptiles that birthed live young, pterosaurs laid eggs, soft-shelled, leathery and fragile, more like those of modern reptiles than birds. These eggs needed warmth and protection, and so the pterosaurs turned the land into nurseries. They nested on beaches, in sheltered cliffs, or inland near water, always in places where heat and safety met. Fossilized eggs found in China and Argentina suggest that some species buried them in sand or covered them with vegetation, letting the earth itself incubate the next generation. And they didn't do this alone. Many sites show clusters of nests, sometimes dozens or even hundreds packed together. It seems the pterosaurs were colony breeders, returning year after year to the same nesting grounds. Picture it: a broad coastal plain under a hot sun. The ground ripples with wind, and all around, the air is thick with the hum of wings. Adult pterosaurs circle above, while others waddle awkwardly across the sand, tending to shallow nests. Their calls echo, a mix of hisses, croaks and sharp barks, the ancient chatter of a prehistoric rookery. The smell of salt, damp earth and life fills the air. From the nests, tiny heads begin to poke through the sand. The hatchlings emerge, miniature replicas of their parents, already covered in fine fuzz and astonishingly already capable of flight. Unlike many birds, pterosaur chicks were precocial, born ready to move, feed and even fly. There was no long helpless childhood, no waiting for parents to bring food. Instead, Instinct took over from the moment they broke free of the shell. Their parents may have guarded the nesting ground, keeping predators at bay, but the young were quick to learn the wind for themselves. The sky, after all, did not wait for anyone. Their social behavior likely extended beyond breeding. There are hints in the fossil record, grouped footprints, communal roosting sites that suggest they lived in flocks or colonies much like modern seabirds. Living together meant safety in numbers, shared vigilance against predators, and perhaps even collective learning. You can almost see them gathering at dusk, crowding along cliff sides or rocky outcrops, their wings folded neatly as they squawked and preened. When the wind picked up, they would take off in waves, the air alive with leathery motion, each creature trusting the others to find the rhythm of the sky. They were also creatures of warmth. The Mesozoic was a greenhouse world, humid, tropical, rich with oxygen. The pterosaurs were exquisitely adapted to it. Their bodies were warm-blooded enough to keep their muscles efficient, their metabolism fast enough to sustain long flights. The fuzzy pycnide fibers that covered their bodies trapped heat, allowing them to regulate temperature even at altitude. They lived in climates where the air shimmered, where warm thermals rose like invisible stairways into the sky. To them, the warmth was not oppressive. It was freedom, a medium for flight. Perhaps, like modern migratory birds, they followed the seasons, not for cold or warmth, but for abundance. When the seas filled with fish and the air with insects, they gathered there. When the bounty faded, they moved on. They were both opportunists and strategists, reading the earth's cycles with the wisdom of instinct. And yet, for all their grandeur, pterosaurs were not perfect flyers in every moment. On the ground, they were awkward, their long wings doubling as walking limbs. They moved on all fours, using their strong forearms to support their bodies. Fossilized trackways show their gait, part shuffle, part hop, part dignified waddle. One imagines them moving with an air of resigned inconvenience, as if thinking, yes, the ground is fine, but it's terribly overrated. When danger approached, a predator lurking too close, a sudden disturbance, they would tense, push off with their powerful forelimbs, and burst into the air in a single motion. In seconds, the clumsiness was gone, replaced by effortless grace. The transformation must have been stunning. A creature that seemed ungainly on Earth, becoming in an instant the master of the sky. Above it all, the world must have looked immense. From high in the air, pterosaurs could see entire coastlines, forests, and river deltas spread out below them. They watched storms forming on the horizon, followed herds of dinosaurs from above, and glided over seas where massive reptiles swam beneath the surface. They were not just inhabitants of the sky, they were its first rulers, the first to truly own the third dimension of life. Scientists still debate how fast they flew, how high they climbed, how long they could stay aloft. Some estimates suggest that large pterosaurs could cruise at speeds of 80 kilometers per hour, rising to altitudes of several thousand meters. Others may have been capable of intercontinental flights, crossing ancient seaways with nothing but the wind for company. Even the smaller ones, though, had extraordinary stamina. For them, the world was connected not by land or sea, but by... And it's easy to imagine the wonder of it all, the sensation of flight, not as escape, but as existence. The air would have been full of motion, wings slicing through thermals, the hiss of air across membranes, the brief flashes of sunlight on skin. To be a pterosaur was to live in constant dialogue with the wind. Every gust was a question, every glide an answer. Yet they were not machines of the air. They were living, feeling creatures. They courted, competed, raised young, and rested together. They likely had hierarchies, social signals, perhaps even a sense of companionship. Evolution had not just given them wings, it had given them the awareness to use them in harmony with one another. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? To imagine that 100 million years ago, above jungles and seas and deserts, there were flocks of these ancient flyers, tracing invisible paths through the sky, sharing air currents, sharing purpose, sharing life. At sunset, the spectacle must have been breathtaking. Picture it, the great orange globe of the Cretaceous sun, sinking low, its light painting the water in gold and fire. Across that sky, hundreds of pterosaurs glide homeward, their silhouettes drifting through the heat-hazed air. Some settle on cliffs, Others circle one last time before folding their wings. Their calls fade into the evening breeze, mingling with the rhythm of waves. And in that moment, as the world cools and the first stars appear, perhaps the earth itself listens to their rustling wings and murmurs softly, almost fondly, "You've done well, my children. You've learnt the secret of the sky. You've made the air your home." Then, as darkness deepens, the last pterosaur lands and folds its wings around itself, the night humming gently around it. Above, the wind still whispers through the empty air, carrying the memory of their flight, a memory of courage, of community, of creatures who dared to live between the clouds and the sea. And if you could stand there in that vanished age, you would feel it too, the pull of the wind, the warmth of the air, and the quiet, impossible truth that once, long ago, the sky was full of life. Descendants and extinction, the end of the age of sky. There are moments in the story of life when the earth seems to pause to hold its breath before everything changes. 66 million years ago, such a moment arrived, swift and merciless, and it marked the end of one of nature's grandest experiments, the reign of the pterosaurs, the rulers of the ancient air. For over 150 million years, they had mastered the skies, filling every corner of the Mesozoic atmosphere with movement and sound, and then in what might have felt like the blink of a cosmic eye, they were gone. It's difficult to imagine the scale of that ending. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event was not merely a chapter closed, it was an entire volume slammed shut. One moment, the world was alive with thunder lizards, vast flying reptiles, and seas of monsters. The next, silence. The cause, as we now know, came from the heavens. A massive asteroid, roughly 10 kilometers wide, struck the Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released energy equal to billions of atomic bombs. The shockwave alone flattened forests for hundreds of kilometers. The blast hurled molten rock and vaporized stone into the atmosphere, where they rained down as fire. Then came the dark, the choking, suffocating dark. Ash and dust filled the sky, blocking sunlight for months, maybe years. The air cooled, photosynthesis halted, and ecosystems that had thrived for millions of years collapsed like dominoes. For the pterosaurs, creatures of air and light, it must have been catastrophic. The very element they depended on, the sky, became their enemy. The once welcoming thermals of warm air turned cold and still. The fish they hunted vanished as food chains in the sea disintegrated. The beaches where they nested were drowned by tsunamis. The warmth that had sustained their bodies gave way to chilling winds. They had outflown storms and outlasted predators. But this was not a storm. It was the end of sunlight itself. In that endless twilight, the great flyers dwindled. The smaller pterosaurs, already in decline before the impact, likely died first, too small to endure famine, too specialized to adapt. The larger ones, those great winged giants that had ruled the late Cretaceous sky, followed soon after, their vast wings, which once shadowed oceans, folded for the last time. Somewhere on a desolate shore, perhaps, the last of them huddled against the cold wind, wings drawn tight, the horizon empty. And then the earth grew quiet. It is tempting to ask what happened to their descendants. What survived the fall of the sky? Here the pterosaurs stand apart from their cousins, the dinosaurs. While some dinosaurs evolved into birds, carrying the legacy of flight into the modern world, the pterosaurs left no living heirs. Their entire lineage ended in that final cataclysm, their branch on the tree of life snapping cleanly from the trunk. They were, in a sense, a closed chapter, one of nature's most brilliant creations, self-contained, complete and finite. No creature alive today descends from them. Birds are not their children, but their distant cousins, both born of reptilian ancestry, yet travelling separate evolutionary roads. The pterosaurs' wings were their own invention, evolved from elongated fingers, not feathers. Their flight muscles, their air sacs, even their brains were different. When they vanished, so did a unique blueprint for life. The sky, though still full of wings, lost a kind of diversity it has never regained. And yet, in another sense, they never truly left. The earth, ever the quiet archivist, kept their memory in stone. In cliffs and quarries across the world, their bones rest like notes in a forgotten melody. They lie folded in ancient limestone, their delicate skeletons pressed into the rock as if caught mid-flight. Their fossils are astonishingly fragile, thin as paper, hollow as reeds, and yet they survived, enduring the weight of eons. When you see one today in a museum, wings spread wide in eternal motion, you are looking not just at a creature, but at persistence itself. The first scientists who found them could scarcely believe what they were seeing. When pterodactylus fossils were unearthed in the late 18th century, they were thought to be aquatic birds or strange bat. It took time for humanity to grasp the truth that these bones belonged to the first vertebrates to take command of the air. In a sense, the pterosaurs never stopped teaching us. Their extinction may have ended their flight, but their fossils gave rise to an entirely new kind of ascent, the flight of human curiosity, and perhaps that is their truest form of survival. Though they have no living descendants, their legacy flows through us in our questions, our awe, our need to understand how something so magnificent could come and go. They live on in our science, in our imagination, in every paper and painting and whispered speculation about the deep history of flight. Still, it is hard not to feel a touch of melancholy when thinking of their end. After all, they had ruled the skies longer than any creature before or since, when mammals were timid and small, hiding in the shadows of giants. The pterosaurs were already masters of the horizon. For over 100 million years, they glided above worlds that came and went, watching continents shift, climates change, and oceans rise and fall. To them, the Earth's long transformations were merely changing weather. And then, suddenly, their time was over. One imagines the last days of their age as strangely quiet. The Cretaceous sun dimming behind a haze of dust, the seas cooling, the winds thin and lifeless, the great flying reptiles, sensing something vast and terrible in the air, circling their familiar coasts, perhaps searching for prey that no longer surfaced, the chicks that never hatched because the ground grew too cold, the last flock disappearing into the twilight, not knowing that the sky would never again belong to them. If the earth could have spoken then, perhaps it would have sighed softly, "Farewell, my sky-bearers. You flew when no other could. You painted the heavens for me." Yet the end, though tragic, was not meaningless. The extinction of the pterosaurs left behind open skies, ecological space waiting to be filled. In time, birds, the surviving feathered dinosaurs, would rise to claim it. And though their wings were different, their instincts were kin, to glide, to dive, to live between the clouds. It is poetic to think that the air itself, once home to leathery wings, found new tenants, feathered echoes of what came before. In the grand story of evolution, endings are rarely endings at all. They are transitions, pauses before the next refrain. The pterosaurs' departure cleared the stage for new performers, but their influence lingers in every creature that has ever looked to the sky and thought, what if? Even now, the study of their fossils continues to reshape our understanding of life. New discoveries show that they were more complex, more diverse, more brilliant than we ever knew. We find traces of soft tissue, pigments that hint at their colors, even impressions of tiny fibers that might have given them warmth and texture. Through them, we are beginning to understand not only how they flew, but what it felt like to be one, to feel the lift of the wind beneath a living wing. Perhaps that is their final gift. Perspective. The reminder that flight is not just an act of physics, but of courage. The pterosaurs were not accidents of biology. They were artists of the air. They learned, long before anything else, how to trust the unseen, the currents, the thermals, the invisible threads that hold the world together. Their extinction may have closed their story, but their spirit, if we can call it that, became part of something larger, the eternal rhythm of life, rising and falling, adapting and enduring. There is even humor in their ending, if one looks closely enough. Picture the universe itself, half amused and half wistful, watching as the great winged reptiles vanish from the sky. Well, it might murmur, "You certainly made an entrance and quite an exit too," and the earth ever sentimental might chuckle through its clouds and add, "Don't worry, I'll remember your wings." And it does. The world remembers them in fossils and stone, in the curve of a bird's flight, in the way the wind still moves with quiet intelligence. Every gust across a cliff face, every echo of wings over the sea, feels a little like a whisper from that vanished age. If you ever visit a museum and stand before the skeleton of a pterosaur, its bones stretched wide, its skull tilted as though scanning an ancient horizon, pause for a moment, look past the glass and lighting, and try to imagine the sound of its wings, the sunlight on its skin, the taste of salt and air it once knew. Think of the eons it ruled, and the heartbeat of the world that outlasted it. Then, as you turn away, remember this: extinction is not silence, it is transformation. The pterosaurs may no longer glide above us, but they still soar in another way, through every mind that wonders how they lived, through every pair of eyes that look up at the sky and dream of following them. Their time is gone, but their story endures. And if the earth itself could look up tonight at its quiet, star-dusted atmosphere, the same sky those creatures once called home, it might smile softly, a planet remembering its first aviators, and whisper into the darkness, "Rest well, my lost flyers. You were my sky once." And so our journey through deep time drifts to a gentle close. The story of the pterosaurs, the flying reptiles who once ruled the heavens, is not simply a tale of evolution and extinction. It is a story of courage, of transformation, and of the Earth's unending imagination. From their humble beginnings among the early archosaurs, those small land-dwelling creatures that first whispered to the wind, came a revolution, wings stretched wide, bones light as breath, hearts tuned to the rhythm of the sky. The Triassic world gave them their first taste of flight. The Jurassic perfected their forms, and the Cretaceous crowned them as the lords of the air. For over 150 million years, they soared across oceans and continents, following the heat of the sun, tracing the invisible highways of the wind. They were dreamers in motion, small ones flitting like living leaves, giants gliding like shadows of clouds. Their world was vast, their skies endless. They hunted, courted, nested, and lived by the currents of air that connected everything on Earth. They saw the first forests bloom and the great dinosaurs rise below them. And when the world changed, when the sun dimmed and the air grew cold, they left behind not despair but wonder. Their wings may have folded forever, but their legacy endures, in fossils turned to stone, in the birds that echo their grace, and in us, the storytellers who remember. Every time a seabird dives, every time a glider catches the wind, some faint echo of their mastery lingers. The sky, after all, has a long memory. Perhaps what the pterosaurs teach us is that beauty can exist in impermanence, that even a life balanced on the edge of physics and air can endure for millions of years, that the world's greatest gifts, flight, lightness, freedom, are also its most fleeting. They were the Earth's first true aviators, and though they are gone, the memory of their flight still moves through our skies. When we look up at the sunset, at clouds glowing gold and crimson, we might imagine them there again, ghosts of wings tracing the wind, ancient travelers forever gliding just beyond sight. And maybe, somewhere, the Earth itself remembers too. Perhaps in the hush of an evening breeze, it still murmurs fondly to its long-lost children. You flew higher than any before you. You carried my sky upon your wings. Thank you for teaching me how beautiful the air could be. So as you rest tonight, let that thought drift through you like a warm current. Imagine the ancient world breathing beneath you, the whisper of wings above, the steady heartbeat of a planet that once dreamed of flight and succeeded. What do you think, dear listener? Could you have flown among them? Would you have dared to ride those prehistoric winds? Share your thoughts if you wish. Then close your eyes. Let the world grow quiet. Somewhere in the dark between stars, the echoes of those wings still glide, soft, eternal, serene. Sleep well and dream of the ancient sky.